Oregon Climate Action Commission to order, and welcome commissioners and agency directors and members of the public that are with us today. We've got a full agenda and some exciting news to share. First, I wanted to welcome some new agency directors that are with us. I don't think they have all joined yet, but I saw that Director O'Brien, the new director of the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, is with us today for the first time. Sarah actually served on a committee of the Global Warming Commission back in the early days. So welcome. We're fortunate to have you as the director of OWEB and on our commission. So welcome.
Thanks, Kathy. It's good to be back.
We have a couple of others. When I did a quick view of who was on, I didn't see them on yet, but we can welcome them as they are able to join us. Just clicking quickly.
Kathy, I happen to notice that Ivan Gall was in the attendees rather than participants. So I think it's very possible he's here, but not in your visible list.
Okay.
Chair, this is Krista Sharon. I was having trouble with my audio when I first logged on, so if you were talking to me and I wasn't being responsive, I apologize for seeming to be rude. I'm now just calling in through my phone and I can hear you fine.
Excellent, thank you. We were actually sitting quietly for a while, but yeah, it looks like Director Colbert is in the attendees, not in the participants. So I don't know. Abby, if you can help elevate her, be great. And for commissioners, you will recognize Director Colbert. She was with the governor's office last winter and worked with the agencies to develop the proposal we reviewed and approved in January for the investment of the Natural and Working Lands funds. So it's great to have her in the role as the director for ODFW and on our commission again, or on our commission and with us again. So as soon as she is able, she can say a quick hello.
Hello, hello.
Excellent. Thanks so much for joining us today. Okay, with that, and again, there may be a couple of others that I'll recognize as they join us. We do have quite a number of guest speakers with us today for the different agenda items. So we'll be introducing those, the speakers as the agenda items come up. And then if Jeff, if you could just cover how to use WebEx for those that might be joining us for the first time, just go over the instructions briefly.
Sure. Abby, can you advance the next slide?
Yep.
So the instructions are here. It's a little illegible. You know, you've got your mute button on the far left. And I really don't know what else to share here. Abby, can you jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. You're also able to raise your hand. So during our question and answer period, if you do have any questions or you would like to make public comment, just down on the bottom, there is that little face. You can click on that and there's an option to raise your hand, or it might just look like a hand. I think it depends on which version of WebEx you're using. There is a chat function just down at the bottom right corner. There's a little speech bubble and it says chat. You can click on that as well and put questions into the chat.
Great, thank you, Abby.
Mm-hmm.
And if folks do have challenges along the way, you can reach out to Abby and she can help you address those challenges. Just looking up and down the list again really quickly. So with that, before we kick off into our agenda, we are going to have time for public comment. It's actually we're doing it earlier this meeting than some of our recent meetings. So that'll be happening at about 1:15, a little after. So depending on how much time we take for public comments, if there are additional updates that members of the commission would like to provide, we may have some time for that, but otherwise our agenda is pretty packed today. So lots of good news to discuss. A couple things before we turn it over to Colin to talk about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Award. Jeff, I just wondered if you would take a few minutes just to give us an update on the recruitment for new commissioners.
Yeah, that sounds great. So as a reminder, HB 3409 directed the commission to expand the voting membership by 4 positions and to include representatives in the manufacturing sector, environmental justice, the fishing industry, and a youth position. And the youth position would be a 2-year appointment. The application or solicitation has been out for a couple of months now. The deadline closed on July 17th. We do have over 30 applicants that are eligible for us to review. So we are in the process of going through those applicants, screening them for consideration. And our next step is to have these applicants reviewed and vetted, and then make sure that our recommendations get to the governor's office, ideally by the end of September, with a goal for appointments early this fall. So that's where we stand.
Excellent. I would love to see them get to the governor earlier than the end of September, but I appreciate that there is a process. So I appreciate that. Alan, you also have some good news to share about staffing.
Yeah, thank you, Chair McDonald. Yeah, after hiring Amy and bringing her on board and helping with DEQ to do our successful $197 million CPRG grant, yes, and then hiring Jeff, we're now getting to the hiring of the National and Working Lands Policy position, which was posted today. And then we have 2 other positions that will fill out the complement in the new climate section, National Working Lands and a Climate Action Research Analysts. And those will be posted, we're staggering them, so they'll be posted next week on Friday the 9th. So if you know any good people that are qualified for either of those 3 positions, any of those 3 positions, please alert them to the opening of those, and hopefully we'll get some really good candidates. I think we will.
Excellent. Thank you, Alan. That's great news that they're posted and we're getting moving on those. With that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Colin to give us a little bit more detail about the great news that Alan just mentioned regarding the $197 million from EPA.
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. Can you first just confirm you can hear me? I don't use WebEx
Yes.
that much. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Colin McConaughey. I manage the Office of Greenhouse Gas Programs at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. And yes, very thrilled to be here this afternoon to once again be talking about EPA's Climate Pollution Reduction Grant program, which is a part of the 2022 legislation known as the Inflation Reduction Act. We've been in front of the commission a few times now talking about this federal program. Certainly, this is the most exciting of the presentations, which is that we received the full amount that we applied for to the US EPA. This is a program that is designed to reduce climate pollution across the country. And we applied to EPA earlier this year for $197 million, as Alan mentioned. And the EPA announced just over a week ago the recipients of the awards. We can go to the next slide and we'll show that map. Yeah, only 25 recipients were awarded, or so 25 applicants were awarded from the US EPA. Oregon is the only state on the West Coast to receive an award. EPA received it was well over 300 applications that would amount to over $30 billion, and they had just over $4 billion to award nationally. So hugely competitive, very much oversubscribed when you look at the those number of applications. So it is really, I think, a testament to the leadership in Oregon in the area of climate policy, and that certainly includes this commission advising decision makers like our Oregon legislature to how to design and develop and implement climate policy, because I believe the reason Oregon was successful in this application was because we had existing programs that we went
Colin,
to.
just, David, yeah, thank you. Sorry, go ahead, Colin.
No problem. Thank you, Chair. Because of Oregon's existing programs that we already have in place, I believe that was a key to our success with the EPA. The EPA clearly directed states and other applicants to prioritize actions that can be delivered in the near term, in the next couple, 3-5 years at the most. So if we go to the next slide and talk about our approach here to this application. And again, for commissioners who recall past presentations on this topic, this is a little redundant, but this is all now through the lens of we did it, we got it. So if you'll indulge us just a little bit more to remind you what we did, how we did it. We in our application mirrored the Priority Climate Action Plan that we developed through a planning grant that we separately received a year ago from EPA. That Priority Climate Action Plan was developed and submitted earlier this year in March, and it identified various existing programs predominantly that could take additional federal dollars and put them to use efficiently and effectively right away. And our application to EPA just a month later in April of this year closely mirrored that Priority Climate Action Plan, including all dozen measures. And again, because those were both programs that were largely already in existence, that had already been stood up, and simply could use more money to do the things that I'll describe here in a couple of slides that these measures include. And Oregon has already, in alignment with EPA's priorities, we have programs in this climate mitigation space that are already prioritizing low-income and disadvantaged communities across our state. And that was another priority of EPA's. And again, I think why Oregon was successful in our application was putting forward programs like that, again, already stood up and already prioritizing those environmental justice communities, rural areas across our state. And let's go to the next slide and talk about the, we call them measures. EPA refers to them as measures. These are the components of our application. What we applied for was for federal funds in these dozen different areas. And I'll save you the time. If you add up these different amounts, that all equals $197 million, the award that EPA announced will be receiving. And these measures really fall into 3 buckets. The first being transportation, which should come as no surprise to this commission. As you well know, that is Oregon's largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions, much like it is many other states and across the country. So we have measures to incent and make more affordable and accessible zero emission vehicles and the charging infrastructure those vehicles need to operate. We also have a number of programs in our building sector, also another huge contributor to Oregon's contribution to climate change, programs to make our housing more energy efficient, electric heat pumps, residential weatherization. And then we have a third category that falls into our waste and materials management. And a big chunk of these funds are to go to developing measures, ways to reduce and reuse Oregon's food waste. That's another deceptively big contribution to Oregon's greenhouse gas emissions. And the commission's going to hear later today from our materials management staff at DEQ around our consumption-based inventory that has informed and really enabled us to identify this as a significant contributor to Oregon's, again, contribution to climate change. And finally, additional monies to capture methane, which of course is a potent greenhouse gas that arises from our landfills across the state. Next slide. You know what, in the interest of time, I know we're behind time, Chair, so I'm just going to skip this slide. This just is another way to break down and identify where these monies are going to go to. But again, in the interest of time, we'll just go to the next slide here and identify the partners that we have here. So in DEQ's application, we partnered with a number of state agencies and entities. These include our Department of Transportation with approximately $11 million going to ODOT to increase charging infrastructure through their community charging rebate program. We're also partnering with the Oregon Housing Community Services. They will also receive $11 million to issue financial incentives to build energy efficient, affordable multifamily rental housing that reduces energy costs for low-income Oregonians. Oregon Health Authority will receive $2 million to increase weatherization improvements, such as adding insulation and air sealing, which can significantly reduce energy use in older homes. The Department of Energy will receive approximately $39 million for heat pump deployment, weatherization, and incentivizing commercial energy efficiency. And then the Energy Trust will receive $15 million to also work on weatherization and incentivizing energy efficiency. And the remainder goes to DEQ to disperse approximately $58 million to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from transportation, again, through zero emission vehicle adoption and charging infrastructure, as well as $66 million to address waste and promote material reuse and low embodied carbon materials. So that's the constellation of state entities that DEQ partnered with in this application that we submitted to EPA. A huge amount of appreciation for all of their help and collaboration. I think that's going to be the final, reason that we were successful as a state is that our state agencies were already well accustomed to working with one another, and it was a natural fit for us to partner with these other agencies that have climate programs. Next slide, real quickly, just to go over the timeline, and apologies, this is a busy slide. I think the main takeaway I want this commission to take from this is just the rapid pace. This is $200 million going out the door in a relatively very short amount of time for that amount of money. And again, we can do that because so many of these programs are already stood up and already operating oversubscribed. So that allows us to put these monies out the door. It's very front loaded, as you'll see here. Culminating out over 5 years, yes, but it's really in the next couple 3 years where the lion's share of these monies and the effort will be underway. So again, that's the main takeaway for the commission, I believe, is that this is both a large amount of money and a very rapid deployment of it.
That's exciting. It's really exciting. Congratulations to everybody that was involved. I know it took a lot of time and effort and was right on the heels of getting the priority climate action plan done. So kudos to all of you that made that happen.
Thank you,
Any
Chair. If we could go
questions?
we have one more slide. And I'm sorry
Okay.
I want to make sure we get to it because it's so important for
Great.
my team here at DEQ in particular with hiring positions. I just want to advertise here to the folks that we are going to be hiring. If you'd like to join our team at DEQ, please keep your eyes peeled. There'll be a number of positions that are opening up in the coming weeks and months. We're also in next steps, of course, beginning to work on developing interagency agreements and contracts between those state partners I was just mentioning. And again, I know you're short on time, Chair, so I'm going to hand it back to you, but I thank you for indulging me. I did want to just make that little announcement there at the end. And thank you so much to everyone involved. Yeah.
Hello?
Looks like we might have lost Chair McDonald, but
Oh, no.
Kristen, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah,
I am
thank you.
here. Go ahead.
First of all, Colin, congratulations on securing this grant for the state. That's fantastic. It was really exciting to see. I guess my question has to do with this, and maybe Janine, if I could, maybe this maybe leans also into Odo, and that is, we seem to have a plethora of resources, which is a very good problem to have. From the IRA funding to now this grant, we have significant funding in the Portland area around PSEF, and just wondering how we can all work together more cohesively and strategically to make sure that we don't have the same dollars chasing the same carbon reductions, and that we're actually optimizing the use of all these funds to drive the greatest amount of benefit to Oregon, both in terms of carbon as well as energy savings and other benefits to our customers. So, when we start to see things like energy efficiency, and then we have ETO, we've got IRA stuff for energy efficiency. Just how do we braid these funds together in a way that really maximizes the impact? Again, a good problem for us all to have, but one that I'm hoping we can address at the state level to make sure we take advantage of this moment in time as best we can.
Commissioner Sharon, thanks for that question. I'm happy to take the first shot, although I'm sure Colin has some thoughts on this too. It's a really good point, and it's something that we have been keeping in mind as we are applying for and implementing these federal grants. And I think the CPRG is a really good example of how we've done that in terms of putting money towards existing programs that we know work. And for example, leveraging work done by the Energy Trust of Oregon. So if you remember back to that slide, I think they're getting $14 million, and that's federal money supporting the work that they do on behalf of Oregon energy consumers. So it's definitely something that we are thinking about, and speaks to the importance of the multi-agency collaboration and multi-agency team that Colin is talking about.
It's certainly something to be paying attention to as we move forward. Are you able to hear me now? Am I back? Excellent. Thank you. Apologies. My internet has been unstable lately for some reason. Well, it's really great to hear about that. Our next agenda item is public comment. And so we will, if you will identify yourself, that you're interested in providing public comment, we'll kind of take stock of how many people express interest, and then we may need to limit your presentation to 1 minute, depending on the demand.
Chair, we have 4 people raising their hands.
Excellent. Good. Do you want to go ahead and maybe Abby, if you could let me know who's on deck?
Yeah, I will go ahead and unmute Megan Kemple. I actually just lost you. If you can go ahead and raise your hand again, I will unmute you.
Welcome, Megan.
Okay, you should be unmuted.
Chair McDonald, members of the commission, my name is Megan Kemple. I'm executive director with Oregon Climate and Agriculture Network. I'm commenting on the Natural Working Lands Fund update. We're thankful for this progress report, and ORCAN is monitoring and engaging with OWEB on their use of the Natural Working Lands funds for conservation management, planning, technical assistance, and payment for practices via the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program. Farmers and ranchers in ORCAN's network are ready to implement on-farm practices that sequester carbon and mitigate climate change, but they need support, including financial incentives and technical assistance. And these programs are designed to do just that. OWEB has just created a methodology for payment for practice based on carbon sequestration and other ecological benefits. We're engaging our community of producers, and there's lots of interest in these financial incentives. I visited an 1,800-acre ranch a couple of weeks ago. That's a great fit for this funding. They were excited about the payment for practices they could take advantage of. We're thrilled that OWEB's new climate and water coordinator is on board and is ready to do the community engagement needed to get this funding and technical assistance to Oregon's farms and ranches in a way that's equitable and effective for farmers and ranchers in Oregon. And ORCAN will be engaging in those discussions. We'll engage our network of farmers and ranchers and farm service providers in the process, and ORCAN and our partners are ready to help roll this program out quickly and as effectively as possible. We're thankful for this progress report, but also want to note that the next report to the legislature in December will be a critical time to demonstrate progress and success, as it will be the last report before the 2025 legislative session begins. Thank you so much.
Megan, thank you so much for your comments. Really appreciate the work that you have done to make sure that people know about this, and are engaged and that programs are, I imagine you will be tracking how programs are working and helping us improve things as we go. So thank you.
All right, and then Joe, you are unmuted.
Welcome, Joe.
Hi, excuse me. Hi, for the record, Joe Courtwright, and apologize for my voice. I am Director of City Observatory, and I wanted to comment on your upcoming annual report. I think it's imperative that you deliver a strong message that Oregon is simply not delivering on its transportation greenhouse gas strategy. As you know, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gases in the state, and it's increasing. And our two principal planning agencies for transportation are essentially in denial about this, both Metro and the Oregon Department of Transportation. Neither of them in their recent reports acknowledges that transportation greenhouse gases are actually increasing. Moreover, the agency planning in both cases is predicated on the assumption that vehicle miles traveled will continue to increase, which is flatly contradictory to state climate planning. For example, LCDC's Climate Friendly and Equitable Communities rule requires Metro to plan for a 30% reduction in VMT per capita by 2045. With population growth, that translates into a 10% reduction in aggregate VMT. We need to be driving about 10% less. But Metro's regional transportation plan is predicated on models that say that we're going to drive 25% more than we do today. There's a complete disconnect between the stated climate objective and what's being planned. The same is true for ODOT, which is planning multiple billion-dollar-a-mile highway projects predicated on 19 to 25% increases in vehicle mile traveled in the Portland area. ODOT's revenue forecasts assume that we will continue to burn as much gasoline in 2033 as we did in 2013, again, flatly contradictory to our climate objectives. All of these strategies for VMT reduction are, I would argue, or point out, are net of the gains that we expect to get from clean fuels, vehicle efficiency, and electrification. We're only achieving about 1/5 of the level of reduction in or improvement in vehicle efficiency that our plans called for. The cumulative result of all this is that we have a transportation greenhouse gas strategy that is utterly failing. And I'll just point out one other thing. When we look at the $66 million in EPA money that was allocated for transportation in Oregon, all of it went to really a handful, about 5,000 vehicles, and none of it went to reducing vehicle miles traveled. And I think it's really important that this commission clearly call out for the governor and the legislature that our transportation greenhouse gas reduction strategies are failing. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Certainly appreciate your concerns. And the commission has identified transportation as a topic that we want to come back to several times this year in preparation and understanding that the legislature will likely be passing a new transportation bill. So it's your comments are timely, and we certainly welcome additional thoughts from you about how we might go about setting things on a better path.
Be delighted to follow up on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Like Zachary is up next.
Yes, and he is unmuted.
Thank you. Zachary, welcome.
Yeah, hi everybody. Chairman McDonald and members of the committee. I am just a citizen here in Bend, Oregon. I have a degree in geology and am kind of a sustainability nerd. I like reading science papers and things like that. One of the things I'd like to comment on today is that even if we were to go to net zero tomorrow, we are still going to see increased carbon dioxide levels for decades to come. And to that end, we're going to need to clean up the last 150 years of greenhouse gases that we've put into the atmosphere, even if we go net zero tomorrow. So I'm just expressing the need that I hope that Oregon moving forward considers all forms of carbon dioxide removal technologies, everything from afforestation to biochars to enhanced rock weathering. to even biomass burial. A lot of these have great co-benefits like enhanced rock weathering, which is the spreading of salt dusts on fields, can increase yields of different types of everything from wheat to tomatoes to other things, and increase actually tree growth, and also biochars you might be familiar with. They have a large number of agronomic co-benefits. So I'm just asking that you going forward, that if anything done around carbon dioxide removal, that you include a whole suite of technologies, because it's going to require many spokes in the wheel for us to decarbonize already all of the greenhouse gases that we've emitted over the last 150 years. That's my comment. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Zachary. Appreciate your comments, and just saying we haven't really talked about technological carbon removal in a while. So we may want to put that on the agenda, on one of our agendas going forward, and to make sure we're keeping up with the latest on that topic.
All right.
So thanks for your comments.
All right, thanks. Yeah, and some of those I mentioned are just really accelerating what nature already does best, but just in a different way. So I really appreciate y'all listening, and congratulations on the EPA money. Way to go.
Awesome. Thank you. Laura Tabor, welcome.
Of the Commission, thanks for the opportunity to provide comments, and congratulations to DEQ and Odo on the CPRG grant. Super exciting. My name is Laura Tabor. I'm the Climate Action Director for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. I want to add to Megan's comments about the Natural Working Lands Fund. TNC is committed to helping increase the pace and scale of natural climate solutions in Oregon alongside action to reduce emissions. We supported House Bill 3409 in 2023, along with many amazing partner organizations in our Oregon Natural Climate Solutions Coalition. And we're really excited for the presentation today and to see the projects and programs getting those funds start to take shape, and really appreciate the agency's work to get foundational staffing and processes in place to use and distribute these funds. Recognizing agencies are focused on implementation of the current funding at the moment, we also want to highlight the importance of sustaining funding for this work over time. While the funding passed in 2023, I keep reminding myself when things feel like they're moving slowly that agencies didn't have approved allocations until just this April. And so given the time and legislative approvals required to allocate the funds, and the fact that according to the report, agencies do anticipate spending the majority of the current funds by the end of fiscal year 2025, it is important to look ahead and ensure funds that will be available to continue offering incentives and technical assistance beyond this initial funding. We really look forward to supporting this work here at TNC and with our coalition partners, and encourage agencies to reach out and share how we can support outreach and efforts to get these funds into Oregon communities quickly and in an equitable way. Thanks again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Laura. I really appreciate your comments. And yeah, I think one of the things that we heard several years ago about how things were going with some of the natural and working lands investments in California coming out of their cap and invest funding was just the challenges when funding is available one year and then not the next year, and maybe it's available again the next year. It's really hard for landowners and technical assistance providers to kind of anticipate what might be happening and take best advantage of it. So I appreciate your comments about consistency. And with that, it looks like we've covered all the public comments. I think we are a little still behind time, so we may have some time at the end of the meeting to have other updates from commissioners. But let's go ahead and move right into the Natural and Working Lands Fund update and legislative report. And Amy's going to give us an overview, and then turn it over to Director Colbert and the agency leads. And in addition to asking them to give us an update on their projects, we also thought we would take a few minutes for each of the agencies to give a little bit of a broader view of the kinds of climate work their agencies are doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Chair McDonald, and good afternoon, members of the Commission. When it established the Natural and Working Lands Fund in 2023, the Oregon legislature directed the commission to provide it with an annual report summarizing how the funds have been used. So over the past month, Odo staff has worked with staff from the Oregon Department of Agriculture, Department of Fish and Wildlife, Department of Forestry, and the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to compile progress updates on each of the funded projects and programs into a draft report that we shared with the commission earlier this week and is also available on the meeting page. So in a few minutes, I'm going to invite representatives from each of the natural and working land agencies to come off camera or on camera to provide just some brief updates on their Natural and Working Land Fund supported programs and projects and their climate work more broadly. But first, I just want to provide a brief overview of the Natural and Working Lands Fund process, objectives, and some other funds that have been leveraged to date. So as you can see from the slide here, this is a timeline of the Natural and Working Lands Fund. It was established in 2023 through the adoption of HB 3409, which was an omnibus bill that contained several directives related to natural climate solutions. Over the fall of last year, Debbie Colbert, who is the current director of ODFW, but who at the time was representing the Governor's Natural Resources Office, worked with ODA, ODFW, ODF, and OWEB to develop a Natural and Working Lands Fund proposal that identified a suite of programs and projects in which to invest the Natural and Working Lands Fund. The commission approved the Natural and Working Lands Fund proposal and its $10 million spend plan in January of this year. And the legislature authorized the funding allocations to the Natural and Working Land Fund agencies in April of this year. In order to meet the commission's reporting deadlines, which are September 15th for the annual report and December 1st of this year for a biennial report on the fund, we asked the agencies to report on their progress in mid-July, just a few weeks ago, and just a few short months after the funds were dispersed. So given this time frame, the Natural and Working Land Fund projects and programs are still in the very early stages of implementation. Next slide, please. In accordance with the statutory directives established through HB 3409, the Natural and Working Lands funding package distributed funds across all categories of natural and working lands and was designed to meet several objectives. The package focused on investing in immediate actions to sequester and store carbon on natural and working lands while supporting forward-looking needs and natural climate solutions. It funds a combination of on-the-ground projects, technical assistance, incentives, and program development. And several projects are in partnership with tribes and I don't think any other entities, but certainly some tribes. I might be misspeaking, but the spend plan also prioritized investments that benefit environmental justice communities and tribes and aim to maximize opportunities to leverage additional funds from other sources, particularly federal funding. Next slide, please. So the projects and programs that are supported by the Natural and Working Lands Fund have already been successful in leveraging those funds. There are just a few examples here that I wanted to highlight. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's Carbon Capture in Coastal Estuaries program has received an additional $3.7 million in federal funds and $2.5 million in state funds since the Natural and Working Lands Fund proposal was adopted. The Oregon Department of Agriculture's Invasive Annual Grasses project has been awarded $1.76 million in federal funds and has the potential to leverage more than $20 million in federal funds over the next 5 years. The Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde have secured $1.6 million in additional funds to support floodplain reforestation on the North Santiam River in partnership with ODFW. And the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board's Water and Climate Coordinator position is supported by $350,000 in federal funds from the Natural Resource Conservation Service. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the complete list of programs and projects that are supported by the Natural Working Land Fund. Representatives from each of these agencies are going to provide some updates on their programs and projects. But before they do, I would like to invite Director Colbert up to the stage, the virtual stage, to share some observations about the Natural Working Lands Fund and the progress that we've seen to date.
Thank you, Amy. Welcome, Director Colbert.
I would just say, first of all,
I'm not hearing you very well.
Hear me? Can you hear me?
You're pretty faint. I don't know if
now? Is that
it's
better?
a little better.
Sorry about that. How about that?
Yeah, now we can't hear you at all.
Okay, how about that? Is that, sorry about that.
Carefully. You speak up and
I
we'll
will,
listen
I'll
really
speak
carefully.
up, and I'll try to be fast. I will just say that first, I just want to thank Amy because she has absolutely swooped in and kept all of the momentum going with the agencies so that we could be in a position to keep these things moving and to provide all of the reporting materials and to just make that go as smoothly as possible. So just a really big shout out to Amy and to all of the agencies that are kind of working on that together. And again, I just think for some folks, especially members of the public, I just want to emphasize that we're all really interested in getting these projects out on the ground, doing great things. And so sometimes it might feel like things aren't going fast enough, but really, this is pretty phenomenal considering the agencies only just got awarded the funds through the state legislature late spring. And especially when you consider some of the things we have to do through the Department of Administrative Services to establish positions. You know, I know there can be frustration and a wish to go faster, and we all agree. And I just want to just acknowledge that I think the agencies are really trying to kind of keep this ball moving as fast as possible. So anyway, it's just exciting to see these projects starting to move forward and just excited and thankful to all of the agency folks that are making it happen.
Thank you, Director Colbert.
Yes, I also want to echo huge thanks to the agency staff. I know that they are working so hard to get these projects implemented, and they have been incredibly helpful in getting information to me in a timely manner. So I really appreciate it. So I am going to invite up the agency staff now, and apologies to the agency staff that I didn't send out a presentation order previously. So I hope that you're all prepared to just kind of go on the fly. But let's just go in alphabetical order by agency and start with Troy Abercrombie with the Oregon Department of Agriculture.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Welcome, Troy.
Thank you. And thanks, Amy. Chair McDonald, members of the commission. Happy to be here with you today and report on some of the progress we've made. I've been thinking about this experience, and I keep coming back to this analogy of the space shuttle when it's first launching and it's smoking and there's fire and it's not going anywhere, and finally it gets moving and finally it clears the tower. And I feel like we're at that stage here with our projects where we finally cleared the tower and we've really built some momentum and are moving forward. I want to give you some updates first on the Oregon Native Seed Strategy. You'll recall this project really kind of supports the infrastructure that will be required as landowners and land managers look to implement climate smart practices, especially around restoration of our natural lands, but as well as some of our working lands. And it focuses on seed collection, seed storage, seed amplification through the build out and strengthening of native seed co-ops and native plant co-ops across the state to ensure that there's ecologically appropriate seed available when it's time for restoration and conservation projects. To date, we have executed a contract with the Understory Initiative, and they have partners working with them as well. That's put about 50% of that grant total on the ground. And so they're focused right now on, there's already been some seed collection, some seed storage, and then a real heavy push right now with engagement with native seed farmers and nurseries, as well as with our tribal communities to help build out these native seed co-ops in Central Oregon and the Great Basin, as well as the Rogue and Umpqua Valleys, as well as some more that will serve the Oregon coast, especially and in particular the projects surrounding coastal prairies. So that was a $235,000 agreement to implement that. We have field work planned for early next season and throughout next field season here in-house at ODA to do some more high priority species collection in Central Oregon and getting into the rangelands of Northeast Oregon, kind of top end of the gorge. And so we're really looking forward to that. We recently presented to the State and Tribal Natural Resource Cluster regarding the $100,000 that we have to give directly to tribes to support their native plant work and native plant programs. That whole process has been quite the challenge, building some of these relationships, learning about the mechanisms for passing that funding along, and some of the challenges that come with that, in particular, usually fairly high administration fees. And so trying to figure out the best ways to leverage what's a relatively small amount of money when you spread it out across our 9 tribes to get the biggest impact, but to also do it equitably. And that's really where our focus is in-house right now. So really excited about the work we're doing there, excited about the contract that we've put in place, and they're already off and running, like I said. So really happy with where we're at there. And I think we're right on pace with how we've proposed the project initially. So no concerns, at least at the moment, for that or any modifications needed. The other project that we have going is through the Noxious Weed Control Program, which I also manage, and that's to address invasive annual grasses. For a long time, the folks who work on this, on that problem and do that work have asked us at the Noxious Weed Control Program to engage, and we just simply haven't had the capacity to do it in a very meaningful way. But thanks to the Natural Working Lands Fund and an agreement that we leverage that money to secure with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, I am looking for the approval to open the recruitment for the first of the 2 positions that will be funded through this. I expect to see approval for that fill this week, maybe by the end of the day even. So that'll bring on really specialized staff dedicated to rangeland health, dedicated to engaging with these partners as they tackle invasive annual grasses and some of the other problems that face our rangelands. You see a fairly lofty number in our potential match of up to 20 million. This person will also just act as a liaison between landowners, land managers, and a multitude of federal agencies and nonprofits who have funding opportunities. They will assist them in grant preparation and project development. And through that, we anticipate securing quite a bit of money that will go directly to those land managers and those landowners. Not to us here necessarily, but directly on the ground. So really excited about that. As Amy mentioned, the first kind of installment funded biennially from the Natural Resource Conservation Service has been secured in the amount of $430,000. And we look to have that position filled hopefully by early October, but depending on the needs of the candidate and where they may come from, it could extend into, the middle or the end of October, but certainly before the end of the calendar year, we'll have them up and running and engaged with those efforts. And we're really happy with the progress we've been able to make there. I think that's kind of all the high level stuff I have. I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe there's someone else here, maybe Director Hansen. I don't know when we're speaking broadly for our agency, if that's a whole separate section or what, but.
I think it's fine for you to go ahead and just turn to that if that works for you.
It's not, but I think we have someone here who.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks,
Director
Troy. Members of the commission, Lisa Sharpelow Hansen, director at ODA. I'm excited to just have a chance to visit with you a little bit and talk about how we are thinking around climate and aligning our work that we do with priorities for the Climate Action Committee. And so just a couple of things that I would hit on. We're thinking more and more about the value of working lands and the opportunities with working lands. What I say in many of my speeches when I'm talking about farmers and ranchers is this is a unique time for agriculture, and this is a unique time to leverage what agriculture does. Our farm fields serve as sponges. Good riparian is filtration, and how you do your work on the land matters. And so we're having those types of conversations. We also have a soils grant that we are looking at and have made some inquiries about doing a little bit of restructuring the scope of work with USDA and RCS and exploring what we might be able to do around climate smart ag and putting some initiatives in place and doing some more outreach. I've also been talking to my Western states counterparts about what they're doing as well to see if there's some good things that we can grab from them to help promote more opportunities in this climate smart arena. We've been doing a lot of work in the water quality, water quantity area. We have several areas where we're updating our water quality plans. One of them was in Klamath. We just recently updated plans in the Lower Umatilla groundwater management area. And we are spending a lot of time in the Lower Umatilla groundwater management area as well. I know that generally relates to nitrates, but it does go along with how we are applying fertilizer, how we are applying water, measurements, and not moving things through the soil that we don't want to be moving through, and preventing additional contributions to the challenges in that area. I know Troy and his crew has recently looked at our noxious weed list and continuing to think about preventative measures in terms of mitigating the spread of noxious weeds. And they've had some activity in the fire areas as well with working at rinsing vehicles coming out so that we're not spreading additional weeds in places we don't want to. I think soil health. Oh, and I would also mention local food systems, and we're thinking about that more and more, and the sustainability and resilience in local food systems and what that does in terms of reducing some of the impacts of emissions. We are still in the process of implementing a state meat inspection program. We have a couple of facilities, one facility that's up and going, several out, and we really focused our grants that we put out on the ground across the state to get them out into some of our more rural regions that provide more opportunity for local meat sources with the appropriate inspections. And again, just trying to reduce some of the transportation and the bottlenecks that come along with processing proteins in the state of Oregon. We have had more grants go through this agency in the last bit, and even since I came here, than I can remember over most of my career. We administered grants for USDA for the regional food systems investments. And this was to bolster up processing in local areas and provide better access to be able to do that, again, looking towards more efficiencies in our systems locally and providing more local sustainability. Farm to school, continuing working with the farm to school program and aligning local producers with those local schools as well as institutions. Mitigating, some of the transportation costs, et cetera, but bringing those local food, the nutrition into the area. Specialty crop block grants, again, that's another USDA program, but really trying to bolster local economies through the specialty crop processes. And those were just some of the highlights of things, as we're thinking about it. One of my interests in it, and it really, we need some resources for it. And so we're trying to figure out how we rearrange ourselves in some ways is to think about more opportunities for climate smart ag and how that can create additional funding streams for our producers. Although if you look at the gross numbers from the most recent USDA ag statistics, it looks like farmers and ranchers are doing great in our state, but when you overlay it with inflation and the costs that have gone up in terms of labor, fuel, fertilizer and other inputs across the state, I continue to hear they're really, really struggling. So anything that we can do, I think, to help bring in, incentive-based programs that help in terms of climate and keeping those farms and ranches viable and the benefits that they bring in terms of, climate and our environment are really important. So the high level, those are some of the things we're working on. We're not getting there as fast as I would like to for a multitude of reasons, but I feel like we're making incremental progress.
Great. Thank you, Director Hanson.
Yes, thank you. Kathy, or I'm sorry, Chair McDonald, would you like to take questions after each of the agencies presents, or would you like to hold questions until the end?
If we can hold questions, I'm just paying attention to time, so I want to make sure we have time for each of the agencies.
Great. Well, then I would like to invite Sarah Reef from the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to present.
Great, thank you, Amy. Just a sound check. Am I coming through okay?
Sound
Yes.
great.
Okay, wonderful. Good afternoon, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. Pleasure to be here. I am Sarah Reif. I am the Habitat Division Administrator here at Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and very pleased to share with you an update on our natural working lands related work. I'll start with the updates specific to the 2024 Natural Working Lands funds, and then I can broaden out to sort of how we're prioritizing natural working lands more broadly. So I appreciate the comments from Laura Tabor and then also from Director Colbert on just acknowledging how slow sometimes the wheels of bureaucracy can be to turn, but we are getting there. And in general, we're still on track with our projects. If you'll recall, we have a number of projects for ODFW. The first of which is floodplain reforestation on the North Santiam River. And this is a great project that will support the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde in restoration of native riparian forest on old agricultural land. It'll reestablish 30 acres of floodplain forests within a wildlife area owned and managed by the Grand Ronde tribes. And the funds are anticipated to cover project management, plant materials, contract costs, and the goal is to increase net carbon sequestration and restore floodplain function. So we're on schedule with our partners at the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde to reestablish the area. The area has undergone Tribal Historic Preservation Office review, and the tribe is scheduled to commence site prep and planting in February of next year. And so we're, and I think Amy also mentioned the incredible work that our partner with the Confederated Tribes did in securing an additional $1.5 million in restoration funds from state, federal, and NGO sources. So we're very proud of that project. Next, moving over to the Columbia Basin, we have our carbon capture and restoration in North Central Oregon Rangelands project. This is a project that is taking place on both state wildlife area as well as surrounding private working lands. This is a feature project for us in that one of our co-funded positions that we have with the Natural Resources Conservation Service is the lead on this project for us. And so she's working on schedule to work on things like herbicide treatment for invasive grasses this fall. We're drafting a contract right now for shrub grow out and planting, and we expect to be releasing that soon. And then planting and grow out is scheduled for next fall as well. So that project seems to be moving along quite well. You'll recall, we also have a couple of big projects for carbon capture in our coastal estuaries. We are moving along with those as well. If you remember, those take place in both the Smith Umpqua estuaries as well as up in the Tillamook. And those are really complex projects that all follow after tide gate replacement, and what the Natural Working Lands funds would go toward are some of the other elements that have that carbon sequestration goal to them, like seagrass restoration and channel reconnection, and really focusing on the vegetation component of those large scale restoration projects. At this point, we've entered into grant agreements with Trout Unlimited, doing business as the Salmon Superhighway. So we have that great, fairly popular program working with us, as well as the Partnership for the Umpqua Rivers. We do have a change in our timeline on this project, again, just due to the timing of the way the funds were distributed. We weren't able to solicit contractor bids for this in-water work period. If you're familiar with stream and wetland restoration work, you really have to time it with these kind of standard in-water work periods where you're going to do the least amount of damage to fish and aquatic life. But we're going to have everything in place in terms of contracts and ready to rock in the 2025 in-water work period. So we're still really confident that that project's going to move along in a timely way. And as you heard from Amy, this is one where I think we can really highlight the leverage that came from the Natural Working Lands investment. ODFW and project partners have successfully leveraged over $1 million of the Natural Working Land Fund monies to receive an additional $2.5 million in state and $3.7 million in federal funds. So big projects, big leverage, and big conservation outcomes with that one. Couple of other updates for you where we've seen the need to modify our timelines. If you'll recall, we have our Red Hills Conservation Area Wildfire Risk Reduction Project that we're working on with the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs. The tribe does have a contractor agreement in place for the planned fuels reductions, but we do need to allow them a little bit more time to work through contract administration and to be ready for implementation. So we have requested an adjustment to the timeline for that project, pushing it back just by 1 year. They have done some great work in leveraging additional grant funding for this project. So doing the best they can, just recognizing that with smaller organizations, sometimes these are the things that come up as you're a little bit slower to get moving than you had hoped. And then if you'll also recall, we're very excited about these. We have these 2 natural climate solutions biologist positions that you approved funding for in the package. And we are happy to report that we're getting ready to announce the recruitments for both of those positions. So I think that's going to be really great timing with Odo's position that they just announced for recruitment. And all of these folks are going to be coming on board at a time where they can really be collaborating and helping support working landowners, helping provide technical assistance. But I anticipate that we'll be needing to extend both of those positions at least partway into the 25-27 biennium, but we are already tracking a lot of federal funding opportunities that they'll be able to assist us in pursuing, and tracking a lot of potential projects that they'll be able to help us with design to ensure carbon sequestration outcomes and climate resiliency outcomes. So that's kind of the update on the project side. And, you know, we're also just keeping an eye on many additional high priority projects that would advance climate resiliency and carbon sequestration on natural and working lands. And so just, you know, noting that we stand ready to engage with the commission and with partners in conversations as we consider the future of the natural working lands funds. There's certainly a lot more, as we've seen, there's a lot of need. There's a lot more habitat restoration work available, especially in coastal estuaries. And we'd like to support some of the research and planning needs in blue carbon habitats. We think there's a lot of opportunity there. We know our partners have a lot of great projects, carbon sequestration project opportunities in rangelands and in our beaver modified landscapes around the state. And we'd love to have conversations with you all about broadening the consideration into two areas that we think go kind of beyond carbon sequestration, but are really essential components to sustaining natural and working lands. And those would be thinking about supporting projects that better understand the social values and the social support for natural climate solutions, as well as just broadening the scope to be inclusive of not only carbon sequestration projects, but also just resiliency projects, and sort of underlining the important role that just sustaining resiliency plays in the overall carbon budget and carbon balance. So, you know, I think much like ODA did, kind of wrapped it up with Director Hansen, I'll just say a few words and then ask Debbie to chime in if her sound's working okay. I think the natural working lands focus of the Climate Action Commission comes at a really great time. I just feel like the stars are really aligning because this is just emerging as one of the top priorities for ODFW as well. We're really prioritizing and advancing our work on natural and working lands. There's, you know, it improves resiliency for fish and wildlife, but also for an important way of life for Oregonians and for climate future. And our focus really is on creating win-wins. Fish and wildlife are obviously really reliant on natural working lands for meeting their basic needs, but also for habitat connectivity between some of their core habitats. And many of the threats that they're facing, that fish and wildlife are facing, are also those same threats that working landowners are facing and that natural land managers are facing, whether it's drought or you know, fire risk, invasives. So if we can create co-benefits for natural and working lands, there's win-wins there for fish and wildlife, for carbon sequestration, et cetera. We have a number of federal grants beyond those that are leveraged with natural working lands funds that are focused on this goal. We have many positions in the agency who are focusing on natural and working lands, including our NRCS funded positions, but also our regional habitat staff as well. We have a lot of restoration and resiliency projects going on, and we're also encouraging the sustainability of natural and working lands in the land use and energy siting arena. So we're sort of bringing natural working lands into those conversations as well. So it really is kind of becoming a central focus for us as an agency, and just appreciate the opportunity to be collaborating with the Climate Action Commission on these creative solutions, and just think the timing is working out really well, and look forward to continuing to work with you all on this. With that, I think I'll just see if Debbie had anything she would like to add.
Well, I don't have anything else to add except for just Sarah is spot on. Natural and working lands, it is a tremendous focus for us. We love the opportunity to be a part of all of this work. It's something that we're talking to our commission about a lot, the governor's office. It's really how we see a core element of climate resiliency and species adaptation is focused on natural and working lands. And so great job, Sarah, with kind of giving the update on the department's work with the Working Lands Fund.
Great, thank you. Both for the comments and the report.
Yes, thank you. It's really great to hear about all of your work and your priorities moving forward. Now I would like to invite Danny Norlander from the Oregon Department of Forestry to tell us a bit about their work.
Amy, did I just lose the presentation or did we decide to take it off?
We took it down because the topic of the conversation kind of was not directly focused, and we thought it was distracting, but we can put it back up if you'd like.
Only if somebody needs it, but I think you're right.
And in WebEx, you're able to pin the speaker so you can have them be bigger. They might not like that, but you might.
Smaller, always smaller. Hope everyone can hear me.
Yes. Thank you, Danny.
Excellent.
Welcome.
I'm Danny Norlander. I am the Forest, Climate, Carbon, and Health Analyst with the Oregon Department of Forestry, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here this afternoon. If you remember back to the list there, I'm going to start at the bottom and move up. So the first one on there is our climate ready seed orchard work. And that's probably the one that we've had the most traction on at this point. Those funds are actively paying for a couple of positions to work at the seed orchard and start to implement the project. We've also been working on identifying species and seed that we would like to have at the seed orchard and as part of the seed bank, and where we can procure or collect those seeds so that we can start the sowing process and get them in the ground soon. Some areas that we need to focus on and figure out are what the infrastructure needs are, I would say. So we need to make sure that we have the right irrigation, and if we need to utilize some of those funds to pay for that irrigation, that's one area that we're exploring just until those get established and need less, just because, hotter, drier summers, we need to provide some extra ample water for the seedlings to fully root. And then also make sure that we have enough freezer space so that we can start storing seed and make sure that it is in good shape and we don't lose any of the progress we make moving forward in storing that seed. So with all of that, we'll be needing to extend those funds into the future biennium, just because getting the seedling sowed and in the ground is going to take more than just one biennium. So that's where the seed project stands. And then moving up from there, we have the $1 million for the tribal outreach and tribal funds for climate smart forestry. And I'm working a little bit with our urban and community forestry folks who got over $25 million for urban community forestry, which has a part of it tied with tribal forestry and tribal community forestry. So working with them so that we're not duplicating efforts and so that we can kind of leverage efforts going on in both spaces to make sure that we are reaching the goals that we both have for our different funds there. So for that one and the one above it, I was hoping to have one position added. That didn't happen, so I'm kind of taking that on in addition to the other work I'm doing, and I'm working to develop the IGAs that are needed for those two projects. So hopefully in the next month or two, we'll have some informational sessions to reach out to partners and tribes so that we can start to really utilize those more moving forward. over the next year or two. And then the last one up there is the 1.5 million for the implementation of climate smart forestry. Again, it's a lot like the tribal portion where we are developing IGAs so that we can go out to the SWCDs and watershed councils and other local government entities that would be interested in implementing climate smart forestry or helping landowners implement climate smart forestry through technical assistance or direct payments through those entities so that we can move forward with further implementation of the ODF climate change and carbon plan. One area that we can lean on is the agency is finalizing a new strategic plan, as most of the agencies have over the last few months. And ours does have a climate change section, which is largely just the goals from the climate change and carbon plan. So we'll have the ability to utilize our strategic plan to really kind of leverage multiple parts and move forward with those efforts. So that's kind of the quick summary on those three projects. More broadly, we're working a lot on our inventory. We'll be updating our forest ecosystem carbon report that we do with FIA, the Forest Service FIA program, and it's really kind of the backbone of forest carbon inventory. So that'll be completed probably the latter part of 2025, and that'll cover a pretty substantial effort moving forward. There's also some projects going forward, again, with the Forest Service to quantify wildfire loss, carbon loss from the 2020 fires. And we also have some work going on around, my mind just went blank. Future projections. So if you've been around for a while, we had our two first reports. We had the Forest Ecosystem Carbon Report, and we had the Harvested Wood Products Report, and then we had this fiscal third study, which was supposed to be looking forward. We're kind of getting there at this point, and hopefully we'll have some results from that at the beginning of next year, probably, utilizing a carbon budget model that's utilized in Canada a lot. And that'll have scenarios developed with it to kind of look at what different forest management approaches have, what the impact is to carbon and forests. So that's kind of a quick rundown of some of the larger stuff that we have. And I'd be happy to answer questions if anybody has them when we're done.
Well, we can save them until after OWEB is able to present and then circle back. I have a few.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you so much, Danny. Now I would like to invite Stephanie Page to present for the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair McDonald and Commissioners. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
All right, great. Well, thanks for this opportunity to provide an update. So as you heard earlier in the updates, OWEB collaborated late in 2023 with the other Natural and Working Lands agencies and the Governor's Office to submit an interagency proposal to the Commission, and the Commission approved funding for that proposal at the end of January 2024. At the beginning of February 2024, our previous water and climate coordinator, Jesse Kirschner, who many of you know and had an opportunity to work with, departed OWEB for a permanent opportunity at OSU. And as those of you who worked with her know, she left some really big shoes to fill. So I'm really excited to introduce our new employee in that role, Alexa Schmidt, who is on this afternoon. See if they have their
Welcome, Alexa.
Camera on. Yes, they do. Great. So we really wanted somebody who could lead the engagement efforts that we committed to in our proposal. We committed before running cycles to use some of the natural and working lands funds in our open solicitation and Oregon agricultural heritage programs to do engagement with environmental justice communities and tribes that are priorities for this funding. So we really wanted somebody with those skills and are really excited to have Alexa on board. So Alexa will be conducting engagement with diverse partners over the next few months and has already met with several of you who are observing the meeting today. We're committed to distributing the natural and working lands funds through open solicitation and through the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program after we conduct that engagement process. So just wanted to share some info around the timing of these two programs and that engagement work. First of all, as far as the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program goes, we committed to distribute the funds through grants for technical assistance and for developing and implementing conservation management plans. And the implementation would work through supporting payments for practices to implement those. So the payment for practices, as you heard one of the commenters mentioned, will be informed by an economic study that OWEB's contractor just completed. And so I wanted to express appreciation for the folks who have been engaged with that work and who submitted comments to the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission at its last meeting regarding those report recommendations for payments for practices. We are also in the process of updating the overall rules for the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Program with the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission, which functions as our Rules Advisory Committee. And we anticipate a grant solicitation for conservation management plan development and implementation and potentially technical assistance launching in early 2025. Both Ag Heritage and Open Solicitation emphasize on ensuring these funds support environmental justice communities. And so our consultation process will assess how the Oregon Ag Heritage Program conservation management plans can support tribal, BIPOC, and rural under-resourced producers. So that is the Oregon Ag Heritage Program side of the shop. And then I would like to talk now about open solicitation. So Alexa has begun communicating with the staff who administer our open solicitation programs regarding how it might work best to distribute the funds through this program. And with the legislation's focus on prioritizing funds for EJ communities and tribes, we're excited to do the engagement to find ways to broaden the applicant base in this part of our programs. So these areas, DEI and environmental justice, are not only a priority for us as an agency, but they're really important to our board, which just adopted a resolution regarding DEI and environmental justice at its meeting last week. Currently, we're thinking that we would do an open solicitation offering separate from our regular October cycle that specifically speaks to and incorporates the natural and working lands funds and the legislative intent on those funds, and intersects with the recommendations in the Institute for Natural Resources report. So the engagement process that we'll be doing in the next few months will inform that cycle. I wanted to note too that we've had conversations with several of you on the meeting today and listening about how do we characterize demand for these funds, even while we're doing the engagement and doing the processes to get the funds out the door. So we hear you, there's an interest in illustrating demand for these funds. And so we've been thinking and talking internally about how to do that while at the same time conducting the engagement that we said that we would do. So that's an update on the funds themselves. And now I'll pivot to talking a bit about what we're doing more broadly. So we have done a ton of foundational work and provide a lot of ongoing benefits regarding carbon sequestration and climate resiliency. So just some of the different things that we've done in terms of that foundation are passing of a board climate resolution in addition to the DEI and EJ resolution that I just mentioned. incorporation of evaluative climate criteria into our grant program rules and into the applications themselves. That has been completed in several programs and is underway in the Oregon Ag Heritage Program. We've got key elements of our strategic plan related to climate resiliency and bold and innovative actions. So those are a few foundational things. We also, of course, as you heard, have hired and onboarded Alexa, and Alexa's position is funded this biennium with federal funding thanks to the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service because of the connections of our work and climate resilient landscapes and working lands. So just some other ways our programs are supporting and intersecting with resiliency and sequestration. You heard about the Oregon Ag Heritage Program and the payment for practices framework that has been established there. We've got projects in our programs that support stream flow restoration. We've got programs specifically targeted towards flow restoration, but then a variety of programs support projects that provide that benefit. Forest health improvements, many of our programs fund forest health improvements. Streamside vegetation restoration, in-stream habitat complexity, water quality enhancements, rangeland health improvements, and tidal and inland wetland restoration. So our programs intersect in so many ways with climate resiliency, sequestration, and healthy fish and wildlife populations that are also more resilient to changing climate conditions. We had a round of open solicitation applications this last fall that had those evaluative climate questions in them. And to help grantees prepare to apply and use those new questions, we created a variety of resources and did training all over the state to help make sure folks were prepared to respond to those questions. And then we have also stood up several new programs over the last few years that support resiliency in different ways: drought resiliency on working lands, landscape fire recovery, post-wildfire recovery grants, and a program that connects grants for land acquisitions for drinking water source protection. So a strong connection to watershed health there. And then we're leveraging federal dollars from a variety of sources, including Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funds, Bureau of Land Management, and Fish and Wildlife Service to help support this work. So with that, I'm gonna pause and see if Sarah O'Brien, our Executive Director, has anything to add.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was very comprehensive. And I will just add quickly, as somebody that's new to state government, that it's really cool to see the interagency collaboration and the work within the commission to figure out how to work together and allocate these funds collaboratively and kind of within each of our own mandates and strengths. So kudos to Director Colbert to set that into motion when she was at Governor's Natural Resource Office, and to Amy and agency staff for moving that forward. It's really cool to see how folks work together from the inside. I did also want to note, and this I think Danny flagged a little bit in his presentation from ODF as well, just remind folks as we approach kind of budget and legislative season here that a number of our agencies are doing this work on limited duration or shared positions. And as we head into this next biennium's budget cycle, we really want to make sure, as Sarah and other folks said, this work is just hitting its stride. And so anything we can all do to work together to make sure that these positions stay funded and the work keeps charging ahead into the next biennium. It takes a little while to roll into motion, but now that we're hitting our stride, it'd be great if we can be sure to keep this work up together. So call out to partners to help us keep the ship in motion now that it's really in motion.
Thank you, Director O'Brien. Great. Well, thanks to all for the information that you shared. I'll open things up for questions on any of the specific projects or pieces that you heard. Maybe just from my perspective, and a number of you talked about trying to think about what the demand is. And I know we're all mindful that we're going into the next session, and it would be great to be able to demonstrate results from the investments that we've had already. It would, but it does take time to stand up a new program. So I am hoping that one of the things that we can work on with the agencies is to develop kind of that a little bit of a sense of potential demand for some of these different programs and uses. And so we'll be wanting to talk with Amy and our soon to be coming National Working Land staff, but also to the agency staff to help think about how we could go about doing that to keep the momentum that we're building at this point. So with that, I will I'm going to go in the order on my screen, assuming that might be the order that you identified yourself. Commissioner Ford.
Thank you, Chair McDonald, and thanks for all the great presentations today. I just have a question for Danny at ODF. He mentioned that they were seeking some additional support beyond Danny's time to help execute on the $3.25 million worth of investments that are being made through ODF. And I notice other agencies are staffing up, and I guess, Danny, from my perspective, I'm an advocate that you probably need help. I know how busy you are and how much you have on your plate, and I'm just curious, what's the issue, and is there anything that we can do to help support creating more FTEs to help in ODF with the execution of this important work?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I think that the Seed Orchard project especially it's got good staff there because it's existing infrastructure and existing staff there. Fortunately, we had a couple of positions that were kind of in the pipeline, and they've been tasked with working on this some more. Beyond that, it was really going to be targeted towards, it was one position that we were hoping to get to kind of help track and do the outreach and stuff to our partners to be able to get the other funds out the door. And I've been talking with our administrative staff and trying to figure out how we can bring on some additional capacity there. But it's slow, as always. We've been doing a lot of other onboarding thanks to the private forest accords and fire season and various other efforts that are underway. So hopefully in the near future, we'll be able to address that some more and get some additional support moving forward.
Hey, Forrester Makamoto, do you want to add anything to Danny's comment?
Well, I need to sit down with Danny and talk about that issue, to be quite honest, and we need to confer. We are challenged in a lot of different areas. Right now, I think 30% of our workforce is out in fires right now, at least. We got 10,000 boots on the ground, 2,000 pairs of boots on the ground. So we're kind of preoccupied with that fire situation. But this is important work, and I will talk with Danny. Danny, we need to talk.
Excellent. Thank you, State Forester.
I've done my job then.
Commissioner Apter.
Thank you. Well, first, just want to, echo so much appreciation for all of the work that you all have been doing, and thank you for the updates. It's so exciting to see the fund come to life, and especially appreciate it just given what has been discussed around just staffing capacity issues. So similar to Commissioner Ford, really eager to do what we can to make sure you all have the resources and staff that you need. I guess kind of building on what Chair McDonald had mentioned, just looking ahead to future reports and next legislative session, I think that in particular, thinking about both the federal funding future federal funding opportunities, and really appreciate all the updates on additional funding that's been leveraged. And just underscore, right, that was, a huge goal of the fund's creation, right? How can we really maximize that opportunity? And I think the CPRG update earlier just underscores how important it is to have programs like the Natural Working Lands Fund that we can then help use to help draw down funds and bring in more resources. So I think looking ahead to future reports, thinking about, for me, it would be helpful to, I think, have a little more clarity around kind of funding that is currently available or will be available directly for landowners and managers, and just really underscoring, the on the ground impacts and benefits of the fund for landowners and managers in Oregon. I think, based on the groundswell of excitement engagement we saw from farmers and ranchers and other landowners during the agency's work to pull together the fund proposal, and also during the original legislative conversation, I can only imagine that funding is going to go really fast. And so just to the extent that agencies are able to try to quantify and estimate what that funding need is, right? So we can do what we can to make sure the fund is able to stay open, that we are able to continue to provide resources for the folks on the ground that want to draw down these funds and want to implement these activities. I think that that will just, help us to make sure we can continue to expand on this important work. So that would be helpful. I think personally would be interested in that moving forward. And again, I think the federal funding updates and any sort of anticipated future opportunities like that are also hugely helpful. So thank you all again.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Director O'Brien.
Chair McDonald, to get used to new titles. I see that we're running close on your agenda here, so I'll be really brief. I was just excited to see some annual invasives funding and other stuff in there that looked like it was potentially relevant to this catastrophic fire situation in Central and Eastern Oregon that Director Makamoto was referring to. So just want to put a hand out to other agencies and partners as I know in OWEB, we're trying to think internally and connect with partners about how we can kind of repurpose existing funding to respond and try to get ahead, especially there's so many of those areas that we would expect to see move into an accelerated fire cycle if there's continued, fire impacts and then spread of invasive species and just make the carbon storage problem progressively worse on those landscapes. So just wanted to note the opportunity, let folks know we're already talking to partner agencies and encourage us to do more of that.
Thank you, Director O'Brien. Any other questions? I had one, Danny, for you. I know that the department was working on a reforestation kind of supply chain strategy. Is that complete, and or can you talk briefly about how you're coordinating with the federal agencies in terms of reforestation and making sure we've got plant materials that we need when we need them?
Yeah. So that was an effort that started, like a couple years ago, and then took a little bit of a hiatus, and now it's back moving again. And part of the reason for that pause was the seedling supply and reforestation efforts are such a regional kind of effort, whether it's where nurseries are, or where seed comes from, or where crews are, or where the fire impacts are that year. We're getting a lot more this year than Washington. Other years, Washington gets more than us. So the group that we were working with, so that was American Forest, was also working to do a very similar thing with Washington. Mm-hmm. And now Washington has been able to get a contract with them to move forward on that. So in the last month or two, we've actually started that back up and are progressing with that effort. I don't remember the timeline exactly in my head, but that'll be completed before too long, I hope, and there will be a needs assessment and supply chain assessment through all of that.
Great,
So
thank
we're
you,
excited
Dan.
about that, and that'll be a regional look, but also have some state aspects as well.
Great, and look at coordinating with the feds in addition to the private.
Yeah,
side.
so we talk with the Forest Service through that process, and they're included with that, and we have other various reforestation calls with them to kind of identify where they are and what their needs are, things that are coming through their shop and whatnot.
Great, thank you, appreciate that. Any other questions or comments from commission members? Again, thank you all for the good work in providing the information, and Amy, thank you for synthesizing it all for us. And that report is due September 15th. We have another one that's due December 1st. That one is supposed to be a little more in depth, although I think you all provided a lot of that information. It might just be an update and maybe corralling it in ways that we can present it. So we'll have another bite at this apple. I do hope we can include some kind of a forecast of demand across the different programs and any lessons learned so far in implementing the program. So thanks again. We are on time for our break, I think. And we had planned to take a 10-minute break. So we will see everyone back here at 2. Oh, excuse me. We are, at 2:55. Sorry. Thank you.
on break. They're probably waiting for me.
That's actually good then. Can you go to the meeting?
See that me?
Welcome, Director Feldon.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We can, thank you.
Okay. I
Just
need to
finishing
turn
up
you
our
up a
break
bit.
and we'll get going on our next agenda item. Perfect timing.
I cannot hear them very well.
It's hard with all these different platforms and all the different settings that you have to.
Try clicking on
adjust.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to get my volume a little bit. Sorry, it would have been earlier. I had trouble getting in.
It is a little, WebEx is a little challenging.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
When folks come back, if you just turn your video on for a little bit so that we can kind of see when we get forum back. For some reason, that 10 minutes went very quickly today. Like we're doing pretty well. Great. Well, let's go ahead and move to our next agenda item. And I wanted to welcome the whole DEQ team, but also welcome the Director Feldon, who is joining us today, and give you a chance to say a few words about your view of this work and the collaboration that we've had. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, thank you so much, Chair McDonald. Happy to do that. Thanks for having me here today. It's great to join you all. I'm really pleased to showcase a report that we're currently developing in response to a legislative mandate to identify additional opportunities to reduce Oregon's contribution to climate change. You know, when you think about DEQ and climate, you likely think about our climate protection program, and you might also think about our Clean Fuels program or other projects to help electrify vehicle fleets. These are all important parts of the state's response to climate change, but they aren't the only way that DEQ is responding. Those of you who've been on the commission for more than a few years may recall hearing in the past from DEQ's materials management program. That program works to reduce the environmental and human health impacts of materials across their full life cycle, from production all the way through to disposal. So today the program returns to you to share an update and analysis that has uncovered significant additional opportunities to reduce the state's contribution to climate change. This is really important work, and it's also groundbreaking and innovative. So I know the team's really excited to share with you all today. I routinely meet with my counterparts in other states, and while we share a lot in common, Oregon really stands out as a leader on this topic. DEQ pioneered the practice of consumption-based emissions inventories in North America, and we're widely viewed as national leaders in the application of life cycle assessment and the development of programs addressing embodied carbon in the built environment, reducing the wasting of food, and extended producer responsibility. Our materials management program has identified some very large potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions above and beyond what the state is already doing. So I encourage you all to lean in to this topic today and in the months and years ahead. So I'll turn it back to you, Chair McDonald, and really look forward to this presentation.
Great, thank you. And before I turn it over to your team, I just wanted to thank again the committee that worked closely with the department to develop this program out and the report. In particular, Commissioners Apter, Ross, Jackson, and Patowski as all folks that worked closely with DEQ on this work. I had the good fortune to make the last meeting that we had, and I just found it fascinating. And I think others on the committee, or the folks on the committee, I think did as well, because we had a very engaged and active conversation. So we can take comments from the committee members maybe after the presentation, just about some of the things that stood out to you as you all participated in this process. With that, I'll turn it over to you, David.
Thank you so much, Director Feldman. Sure. Hear me okay?
Not very well. A little more volume.
Not used to this WebEx system. Is this better?
You might need to change speakers. Sometimes that's the problem. And I think if you go,
David, you can also turn up the volume on your microphone under settings.
That didn't work. Not able to change speakers. Alan, Odo, anyone?
if you go to the mute place, you can look at your audio settings there.
Mute caret, and then audio settings.
Let's try this one. Is that better? Can you hear me?
It's not much better.
Okay, how about this one? Is this better? Can you hear me?
It's a little better.
How about this one?
That's even better.
I can't hear you.
You can't hear us at all?
Is this one better? There's 6 options here, so
You're getting better and better.
let's try this one. Can you hear me now?
That was a little worse.
Okay. Well,
Hey, David, I tried Real Tech Audio and that helped me hear Chair McDonald and you better, if that is of any help.
thank you. Let me try this. Now, how is this?
I can hear
Hear
you,
me
but I should leave it to Chair McDonald for, yeah.
Chair McDonald, can you hear me any better? Can you hear me?
How are you doing, Alan? Can you hear David pretty well? No.
Oh,
Well,
I can't hear him very well.
we can go ahead and just listen carefully. And if you can speak up.
You can also call in on your phone, David.
okay. Please give me 1 minute to do that. I'll give that a try.
Great.
Hang tight.
We could maybe advance to the next slide and maybe Leah, if you could maybe introduce the team or.
Sure, happy to do that. And I haven't scrolled through. I assume all of the team is on here today, but I'm not positive as I'm looking. It looks like maybe I of course see David Alloway. David, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me
Great.
now? Okay, I'm just gonna kick things off here and then hand it over to a team member to carry the baton while I get this technology sorted out. I apologize. Again, so good afternoon, Chair McDonald, members of the commission. Thanks for inviting us into your meeting today. I am David Alloway with the Oregon DEQ, and I'm here to continue a consultation with the commission on this topic of consumption-based emissions. I introduced this project to you at your meeting last December, and since that time, we've held a series of conversations with a committee of this commission and conducted a technical analysis that has uncovered rich opportunities to reduce emissions. As Director Feldman said, we have a deep bench of staff working on this topic, and 5 of us are here today. For the presentation, I'll be joined by Jenna Throckmorton and Martin Brown, and to field questions, we're also joined by Amanda Ingmeyer, who leads our Built Environment program, and Elaine Blatt, who leads our work around food systems. Jenna, who co-managed this project with me, will take it from here, and I will hope to have better audio when I return. Jenna, thank you.
Thanks, David. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. All right. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So we thought it'd be useful to remind you all of the mandate in section 52 of last year's House Bill 3409. As shown here, DEQ is to update the state's consumption-based emissions inventory, make recommendations for future updates, identify opportunities to reduce those emissions, and evaluate economic, social, and environmental impacts. We're also directed to consult with this commission, and our report is going to be due in September of this year. So with that reminder, we're going to go over today's agenda. Can we move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So today we're going to provide a quick refresher on what consumption-based emissions are and why they matter. We'll then share top-line results from the state's consumption-based emissions inventory, which we've just completed updating. We'll pause for clarifying questions on that, and then we're going to turn to opportunities to reduce emissions, followed by a dive into DEQ's draft recommendations to the legislature. After we wrap up our presentation, Chair McDonald will facilitate questions, feedback, and some open discussion. So before we move forward, are there any questions about this agenda item? Okay, I don't think I see any. So with that, we'll go ahead and turn to content. Our colleague Martin Brown will be introducing the concept of consumption-based emissions counting. Next slide, please, and then Martin, take us away.
Hi there, I'm Martin Brown from DEQ, and hopefully you can hear me. All right, good. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick refresher on consumption-based accounting and why it's important. First, I'll very briefly describe Oregon's 2 greenhouse gas inventories. Then I'll give a really small scale example of consumption-based accounting and emissions. And along the way, I'll suggest 2 main themes of these consumption-based results: responsibility and opportunity. Responsibility is a theme because consumption-based analysis changes our perspective in a way that can be humbling. And opportunity is a theme because this work also reveals new ways that we can act to make the world a better place. Next slide, please. So as you know, Oregon has 2 different greenhouse gas inventories, the sector-based and the consumption-based. And for today, here are the crucial differences. The sector-based inventory is based on emissions that happen within our borders, such as factories and vehicles that burn fuel. And then we also add in emissions linked to imported electricity. The consumption-based inventory is based on something else, economic demand, which is a fancy term for spending or purchases by households, by businesses, or by government. And because money from purchases can flow over borders, impacts like emissions that are linked to purchases can happen on either side of the border. Next slide, please. So here's an example of consumption impacts for a very small piece of economic demand, the cup of coffee that I made in the office today. So I was the source of the demand because I bought the beans and I made them into a drink. And now, as a conscientious person, I'm curious about all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with this consumption. So I'm just going to start listing them out and mapping them. Next slide. So to make the coffee, I had to boil water, which created emissions in Oregon when I used my stove. So I highlighted Oregon there on the map. Next slide. But before I could use the beans, they had to be roasted in a machine that probably looked like this. And there are emissions from that roasting process. The beans I used were roasted in New Jersey, so I highlighted that state on the map. Next slide. But before the beans could be roasted, they had to be grown, and that created emissions from operations like driving trucks at harvest time. Now, the beans I used came from the Malabar region of India, so I've highlighted India there on the map. Next slide. But before the truck could be driven at harvest time, it had to be made in a factory, and factories, as we know, are sources of emissions. So I don't know exactly where the truck was made, but the world's major truck parts suppliers are located in China, Spain, Ireland, Canada, Mexico, and of course, the Midwest of the US. So emissions for the truck came from all over. Next slide. So I'll stop there because it'd be possible to go on forever. But I think this example is enough to show that even the simplest daily act depends on an economic web that stretches far beyond Oregon. And we influence emissions in all those places. However, our standard sector-based method of accounting would only count the emissions in Oregon borders when I boiled the water. So when I look at this map, that seems like a real omission of emissions. Next slide. Consumption-based view, it opens up perceptions in two ways. First, it reminds us that in a modern economy, Oregon is not an island. We influence lives and emissions far away, for better or worse, and the rest of the world influences us. Greenhouse gases don't respect borders, so Oregonians can benefit from reductions even if they take place a world away. Second, it suggests that there are opportunities to reduce emissions beyond our borders simply by changing what we buy. And that's something you'll hear more about later in the presentation. But first, I think we're going to have some key results from the consumption-based inventory, and we'll skip one or two slides. Yeah. David.
David, you seem to be muted.
Abby, can you unmute David?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great.
Excellent.
A terrible echo on my end. I'll try to ignore it. Okay, so Martin just gave you an introduction, and I'm going to share a little bit about the consumption-based emissions inventory. The inventory estimates all of the emissions associated with Oregon's consumption. And we could spend an hour on the inventory alone, but I'm going to try to summarize it in the next few minutes. Next month, we plan to publish a technical report about the inventory that complements the legislative report, and we're happy to discuss the inventory in more detail later offline with members of the commission who want to dig in deeper. The consumption-based inventory builds off of Martin's coffee example, but applies to all consumption of all commodities by Oregon. It's organized around standards used in national economic accounting. It is intended to complement the traditional sector-based inventory because both inventories by themselves paint incomplete pictures of how Oregon contributes to emissions and subsequently the opportunities to reduce those emissions. The consumption-based inventory then complements the sector-based inventory by identifying additional ways in which the state contributes to climate change. And that's important if you believe that climate change is a serious problem that merits a robust, comprehensive response. It's also important if you believe that the response should prioritize measures that give us the biggest bang for the buck. And by that, I mean measures that are the most cost-effective at reducing emissions, regardless of where the emissions physically originate. There's this distinction that's often made about in-state versus out-of-state emissions, and this is somewhat distracting because 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide has the same impact on Oregon, regardless of whether it arises in Salem or in Shanghai. So a more useful and important frame is whether actions in Oregon contributed to those emissions and whether actions here in Oregon could reduce them. Next slide, please. This diagram, waiting for the slide to change. Thank you. This diagram here shows the overlap between the state's sector-based and consumption-based inventories for 2021. Sector-based is the yellow circle on the left. Consumption-based is the blue circle on the right. There's considerable overlap shown in green. The sector-based inventory, again, is the best known and has informed and inspired the vast majority of climate policy and programs in Oregon. And yet it barely touches on half of the emissions. This aqua crescent over on the right-hand side, these are emissions that are unique to the consumption-based inventory. The CBEI brings to the conversation an additional 59 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is almost as much as the entire sector-based inventory itself. Next slide, please. This graph shows how the two inventories have changed over time. Sector-based is the green line on the bottom, consumption-based is the blue on top. The consumption-based inventory has always been higher, but the gap between them has grown every time we've looked, from just 5 million metric tons higher in 1990 to 34 million metric tons higher in 2021. Indeed, the sector-based inventory peaked in 1999 and has fallen 11 million metric tons from that peak. The consumption-based inventory has climbed much more than 30 million metric tons during the time span shown here. You can see clearly that focusing only on the sector-based inventory paints a pretty incomplete picture. By ignoring the effects of consumption, you might conclude that Oregon has turned the tide. And in one dimension, we have. These programs that are aimed at reducing sector-based emissions are critical and essential and important and valuable. They are winning the battle. But I might suggest here that we are losing the proverbial war. Oregon's overall carbon footprint, our collective impact on the global climate, has gone up, not down. Next slide, please. This chart here shows Oregon's consumption-based emissions by spending category and life cycle stage. The purchase and use of vehicles contribute the most to Oregon's consumption-based emissions. And while most of those emissions occur as a consequence of vehicle use, shown in green, the emissions from producing those vehicles in blue is not trivial. In fact, they're larger than all emissions from using lighting, for example. Food comes in as a close second, and those emissions are largely at farms and factories, mostly out of state. Appliances are third, again dominated by use, followed by services, and then other manufactured goods and construction, which are mostly about materials. So popular wisdom holds that it's our use of cars and furnaces and electricity-consuming devices that contribute the most to climate change. And when viewed through the lens of consumption, we find that this direct use of energy by consumers, shown in green, contributes only 28% of the total. 71% of the emissions, shown in blue, arise upstream of the consumer in manufacturing and supply chains. And that number has grown over time in both absolute quantity and relative percentage. Next slide, please. Here are the same emissions, this time organized by type of consumers. And I show this primarily to highlight that while households contribute the most to these emissions, governments in yellow contribute another 11% through government purchasing. And the largest single category for government purchasing is construction. And that's mostly embodied carbon in infrastructure, such as roads. Next slide, please. Here are the emissions again, this time organized by location. 42% of these emissions originate in other states, 26% in other countries, and 32% here in Oregon. And that's important because there is overlap between the state sector-based and consumption-based inventories. Traditional climate programming informed by the sector-based inventory, such as clean fuels and the climate protection program, reduce emissions in both inventories, just as some of the new consumption-oriented policy options we'll share in a few minutes can also reduce emissions in both inventories. And one more slide, please. Oregon households contribute very different amounts of emissions based on their income. Lower income households contribute less on average, and so have fewer opportunities to reduce emissions, in addition to less disposable income available to make changes. They also tend to be more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as lacking air conditioning and being more exposed to smoke and risks from catastrophic wildfires. On the other end of the spectrum, higher income households contribute more per household to climate change. They also have more opportunities to reduce emissions and more ability to do so. So there are some clear equity considerations here. Okay, well, this is just a snapshot of what we found in the update to the inventory. We have many, many more results that I'm sure some of you would find fascinating, but we'd like to pivot to the actual solutions. So we're going to stop here and do a quick check if there's any clarifying questions about the inventory before we turn to the discussion of solutions.
I have one while others are getting their thoughts together. Has the distribution inside in Oregon versus out of Oregon changed in the three, since you started doing this a dozen years ago?
Yeah, Chair McDonald, thank you. I believe that the emissions profile has shifted away from in-state emissions and shifted in the direction of other states and other nations. Just as the overlap between those two inventories has sort of widened, the little area between the two inventories has gotten smaller over time because we're essentially outsourcing more and more emissions and importing more and more embodied emissions.
Second question, I don't see any hands, so I'll ask a second question. When I first looked at the numbers that you presented in the graph, it looked on the surface that it was that the per capita change in the consumption-based emissions hadn't really changed a lot. But then I know you've got a slide later, and we could put a pin in this and come back to it when you're through the rest of the deck. But given that the emissions intensity of some of the products have gone down, that means that there is a lot more consumption. It's a lot more consumption and more population. Is that right? Did I interpret that slide?
Thank you, Kathy, to Chair McDonald. Yeah, if you think of consumption-based emissions as being a function of three different factors, and this is the classic impact equals population times affluence times technology formula that Donella Meadows and others popularized in the 1970s. What we've seen over the last 15 years is that the emissions per dollar spent have gone down. So energy efficiency, fuel switching, decarbonization, it's all helping. However, that decrease has been overwhelmed by an increase in consumption. And most of that increase is not due to population growth. It's due to rising affluence and incomes.
Great, thank you. I don't see any other hands up.
If there are none, then we'll proceed with our presentation and take more questions at the end.
Thank you.
So next slide, please. Oh, the next slide. So our new consumption-based inventory indicates that our state's emissions are quite large. What can be done to reduce them? House Bill 3409 directed DEQ to identify and evaluate opportunities to reduce consumption emissions. To help satisfy that directive, DEQ hired a contractor with experience in this topic. Stockholm Environmental Institute, or SEI, has performed similar work in Europe and elsewhere in North America, and they performed some significant new research in support of DEQ's legislative report. In particular, SEI reviewed dozens of action and policy options and created a qualitative evaluation of each one, considering economic, environmental, and social considerations. Then, going beyond the qualitative, SEI took DEQ's updated inventory and extended it in several ways. To evaluate cost effectiveness formally, it created a marginal abatement cost curve for a selection of action ideas, relating costs to potential emission savings. It also projected Oregon's consumption-based emissions forward in time, showing where those emissions would land with and without individual policies in place. This was the wedge analysis. DEQ intends to publish all of SEI's material in another technical report that will be a companion to our report to the legislature. At the end of all that work, DEQ and SEI found there are large opportunities to reduce Oregon's consumption-based emissions, often in a way that creates other benefits for Oregon's businesses, residents, and environment. We'll spend the next few minutes introducing 4 key areas of opportunity. They are embodied carbon in the built environment, food systems, product policy, and additional smart growth. Now I'll hand the mic to Jenna to discuss the built environment.
Fantastic. Thanks, Martin. So the first category of opportunities we're going to discuss here today is the built environment. The built environment is vast and varied. It encompasses residential, commercial buildings, public spaces, the interiors of those buildings, and the equipment and furnishings within them. It also extends to essential infrastructure like sewers and roadways. In fact, roadways and associated infrastructure are government's top spending purchase. And actually, can we move to the next slide, please? Sorry, I forgot to say that. Thank you. Which highlights our, a need for a systemic approach here. So one of our most emissions impactful areas of built environment that is not accounted for in the sector-based inventory is that of embodied carbon. We'll be focusing on that here today. So embodied carbon constitutes a large and growing quantity of emissions associated with building materials used for construction and to maintain our buildings and infrastructure. Embodied carbon is a major contributor to Oregon's emissions, responsible for about 30% of consumption-based emissions. And we can see here about 91% of those emissions generate from the production stage of a building materials life cycle. So this means many of the emissions associated with built environment are generated in the production phase. Next slide, please. The main identified pathways of addressing embodied carbon are listed here on this slide. We have decarbonizing building materials sold into Oregon, encouraging space-efficient house sizes, enhancing the utilization of already existing buildings as well. Some ways in which we might achieve reduction goals of addressing embodied carbon could include information disclosure, such as environmental product declarations of emissions and building materials. This would mean consumers and contractors would both have access to knowing the breadth of emissions associated with a given building material. Another approach here would be zoning and land use policies. Some examples being house size limits, incentives for multifamily dwellings, and so on. So finally, providing financial incentives to those actually developing housing through programs built to reward buildings that meet or exceed carbon benchmarks would be another possible approach. And we cover a fuller suite of options in our legislative report, but these are just some we'd like to highlight here. So can we move to the next slide, please? Our second category here that we're going to discuss is food. As you heard earlier, food is the second largest category of Oregon's consumption-based emissions, making this category one of the most opportune areas of emissions reduction. Emissions from producing food sold into Oregon are larger than emissions from the use of vehicles by households and governments combined. And this is why policy and program approaches provide the level of support necessary to make climate-friendly food choices. The 3 major outcomes of emissions reductions for this category are decarbonizing food supply. An example of this would be improving agricultural practices to be less emissions intensive. Next is the reduction of meat and dairy consumption, which has been highlighted in SEI's research as one of the highest impact reduction potential for reduced food-related emissions. Finally, the final outcome is the reduction of food waste. But an important note to make here is that food recovery efforts, such as composting or digestion, only reduces disposal emissions associated with the food item, whereas the prevention of food waste would be a more upstream effort prior to reaching the market. Some examples of policy or program approaches that could help realize these outcomes would include financial incentives for producers to switch to less carbon-intensive practices, updating government procurement standards to promote lower emissions purchasing, and emissions intensity standards for foods sold into Oregon. I'm going to hand the baton off to David as we move to the next slide, please, to start discussing product policy.
Thanks so much, Jenna. So the third major group of opportunities involve other products such as electronics, furniture, and clothing. there are two major outcomes that could reduce these emissions. The first would be to reduce consumption, for example, by improving durability. There's been a measured reduction in the lifespans of durable goods, and the state's new right to repair policy should help to reverse that trend, but there's more that the state could do. For example, Oregon could borrow a policy from the European Union, which requires that all major appliances be sold with an extended warranty. And this discourages producers from designing for planned obsolescence and could save consumers money. The second major approach would be to reduce the carbon intensity of these types of products, and one way of getting at that would be through labeling and disclosure, because there's some evidence that when producers evaluate and disclose the environmental impacts of their products, they're much more likely to reduce those impacts. A labeling requirement could lead to reductions not only in greenhouse gas emissions, but also other pollutants, with health benefits from reduced pollution in communities that host or live downstream or downwind of manufacturing sites. The state is already doing more to create standards, incentives, and sometimes even mandates for the evaluation and disclosure of life cycle environmental impacts. This is a new emerging field. Current programming, however, is pretty limited, and much more could be done here. So these are just two examples, and our report will share many other policy ideas. And this brings us to one of the more important ideas of this report, which is the idea of product policy. But just for context, the sector-based inventory focuses on emissions from in-state manufacturers. So it logically then informs solutions that regulate those in-state sources through programs such as the Climate Protection Program. And that's in keeping with 50 years of precedent in environmental regulation, which tends to focus on point sources of pollution. And one common refrain from businesses is that if Oregon regulates its in-state businesses, it can create a perverse incentive for them to leave the state, taking emissions and jobs and tax revenue with them. Now, in contrast, the consumption-based inventory is agnostic with regard to location of emissions production. Its concern is what is consumed in Oregon, which means what is sold in Oregon. A policy that obligates producers to reduce emissions or fund emissions reductions on the basis of what they sell into Oregon could reduce emissions while maintaining a more level playing field between in and out-of-state businesses. And we have a precedent for this in the state's 5 different extended producer responsibility laws. For example, next year, in-state producers of packaged foods will start paying into a fund that will help to modernize recycling and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They will pay fees based on what they sell into Oregon, not what they produce here, and not what they sell anywhere else. Their competition, including out-of-state competition, will be similarly obligated. And that's about as close to a level playing field as one could design. This general approach could be used in a variety of ways. For example, to enhance reuse and repair of durable goods, or to fund a decarbonization initiative that could help in-state businesses become even more efficient and competitive in the global economy. The idea could apply to any material, including building materials and foods. So our report will explore this idea some more. And now Martin will share the last major opportunities before we turn to our draft recommendations.
Thank you, David. Next slide, please. Okay, the final opportunity category for reducing consumption-based emissions is in the area of smart growth. And by smart growth, I mean the creation of walkable, accessible communities for people to live in. This isn't exactly the same as high density. I mean communities where all the basics of a good life, housing, schools, parks, and employment are close and connected enough that you can do most of them without a car. In walkable communities, transportation emissions are much reduced because you don't need to drive as much. And also, your family doesn't need to own as many cars, so the emissions linked to making the cars are also reduced. Housing-related emissions are similarly reduced across the life cycle because these communities tend to be more materially efficient. And from a government point of view, there are less impacts from infrastructure because the spending on things like roads and sewers is lower per person. Smart growth is special because it has a lot of demonstrated co-benefits. These living environments are associated with improved health outcomes, probably because people walk more and there are fewer traffic fatalities. Also, they're associated with the preservation of open space like forest and farmland. Finally, they're the kinds of places that a majority of people want to live in, according to surveys by the National Association of Realtors. In terms of encouraging this type of development, Oregon has some policies already in place. Recently, DLCD created rules for its climate-friendly and equitable communities programs, which affects housing and transportation planning for Oregon's bigger urbanized areas. Those rules provide a clear direction, but they could be strengthened by several types of actions. One class of action that seems promising is incentives for smart growth development. And just one example of such incentive from the recent past is Portland's elimination of systems development charges for accessory dwelling units, which provided a notable increase in production of that housing type. Next slide. So I know we've given you a lot today, but those are just some of the highlights. There's a lot more detail that's going to be available to you in the reports that we're publishing. And of course, we're also happy to engage with you directly. Next slide. To wind up the results, I'm going to zoom forward to the conclusions from our technical analysis to give you an idea of where Oregon's consumption-based emissions are heading. So on this chart, there's a timeline going out about 30 years on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, we've got consumption-based emissions now per person. And to start off with a standard, I've plotted a zone which our contractor SEI considers to be a sustainable level of emissions. That is a level compatible with ecological stability. It's around 2 to 5 tons per person per year, and it's in this gray zone at the bottom of the chart. Next slide. Now, next, for perspective, I've plotted the consumption-based emissions for some other countries that are similar to the US in that they have high incomes and high qualities of life. And these countries end up around 9 to 15 tons per person per year. So they are not down in the sustainable zone, but some of them, for example, Spain, may be getting close. Next slide. Next, I'll add in SEI's wedge projection for Oregon. Now, if you look at the very top of the chart, the dotted line shows the trajectory emissions if we do nothing at all. We just continue as things have been. Then going down, the large dark wedge is the effect of state and federal policies that are already on the books, plus our climate protection program, assuming it is reinstated in some similar form to before. So that large dark wedge is encouraging. It shows that policies inspired by the sector-based inventory have also reduced some consumption-based emissions. The colorful wedges below show the effects of additional consumption-based policies that are not yet on the books, but that we studied and quantified for our reports. Things like the built environment work, the food changes, and so on that you heard about today. So the consumption-based view is adding a lot to the menu of options. However, even if we put all the ideas that we studied into effect, we still in 2050 are going to land above the sustainable zone. Next slide. So the space in between our trajectory for 2050 and the sustainable zone, we are calling the emissions gap. And the existence of this gap shows us there is a lot more work to do. But there are some encouraging notes. First, the example of other countries shows that lower emissions are not just possible, but compatible with a high standard of living. Second, it may help to know that this model doesn't incorporate all the efforts that other states and countries could make to decarbonize their economies. If other states and countries work as hard as Oregon, some of these wedges would be bigger and we'd be closer to the sustainable zone. And finally, this model assumes that consumption per capita will continue growing in the future as it has in the past. And that assumption may not be right. There were signs during the COVID pandemic that people can prioritize quality of life over maximizing consumption. And if that feeling becomes influential, reaching the sustainable zone could become a reality. Now I'll turn it back to David to wind things up.
Thank you so much, Martin. We're in the home stretch here. Next slide, please. So the legislature directed DEQ to update the inventory, identify opportunities to reduce emissions, and evaluate economic, social, and environmental impacts. We found a lot of emissions and a lot of opportunity, not only to reduce emissions, but also potential for significant co-benefits. To support a more ambitious and comprehensive response, we're proposing to make 3 recommendations to the legislature, which we would like to get your feedback on. Next slide, please. Our first draft recommendation is that the state should adopt a goal to reduce these emissions. We've seen time and again how the state's goals for reducing sector-based emissions have informed and inspired a really robust policy response. Adopting a parallel consumption-based goal would enable a more comprehensive and cost-effective response by the state. It would formally acknowledge a more comprehensive view of Oregon's carbon footprint and our responsibility and opportunities to reduce it. SEI's technical report will include a discussion paper explaining how such a goal might be established, including examples from other communities. Next slide, please. Second recommendation is that DEQ should more regularly update the consumption-based inventory. Historically, we've done these updates once every 5 years or so, and the infrequent nature of these updates has made it difficult to sustain focus and momentum on this topic. Importantly, it takes far less staff time to update the consumption-based inventory than it does the sector-based inventory, which DEQ updates every year. But the sector-based inventory has dedicated staff, while the consumption-based inventory does not. Next slide, please. Our third and final draft recommendation is that the legislature, the commission, state agencies should increase actions to reduce consumption-based greenhouse gas emissions. And in doing so, particular attention should be given to policies that meet the criteria shown here. They should address high impact categories of emissions and activities with high emissions reduction potential. They should enable consumer choices through structural and policy changes that make low carbon choices more easy, affordable, equitable, and accessible. They should center human well-being in policy design, and they should align with other state priorities. Next slide, please. So that's an overview of consumption-based emissions, and we hope that the Commission will see the value of engaging more on this topic. DEQ stands ready to continue this work and support the Commission in ongoing future discussion. There's just an incredible amount of opportunity here. Next slide.
David and team, thank you so much for this great presentation. I'm really excited to see the full report or the reports, plural. It looks like you did just a really phenomenal job pulling all this together. I wanted to give the members of the committee an opportunity to just reflect on the things that really stood out to you during the discussions that you all had with DEQ, if you'd like.
So hi, this is Commissioner Ross. I was just gonna say that, I really enjoyed, serving and, being able to listen and provide input. And I think, especially the slide where you just starting with a cup of coffee, right? And just really doing that walk and helping us to understand, just the impact that this has was truly valuable. So I really enjoyed the presentation today and how all of that data, all of that work, has come together in this. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Ross. Commissioner Apter?
Yes, I would echo Commissioner Ross and just first expressing so much gratitude to the DEQ team. I have spent the last many years focused entirely on climate policy mitigation, and can definitely attest that this is a very, overlooked area of work and opportunity. And so have just felt really grateful to have the chance to learn and dig into this. Really excited to see the recommendations come together and have a conversation, not to jump ahead in the agenda, but about how we can best lift these up in our report to the legislature. And would just say, I think part of what is exciting is twofold for me. One, just, as an environmental advocacy organization, we hear a lot from everyday Oregonians who, recognize there's a lot happening in terms of addressing sector-based emissions, but so much eagerness and enthusiasm to see themselves as part of the climate solution. And so I think thinking about this kind of consumer and individual empowerment piece, and secondly, just seeing the intersection between some of these specific recommendations and opportunities as we think about expanding and delivering on our housing goals and building livable, climate smart and equitable communities, right? Thinking about transportation. So I just think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of how some of the consumption-based recommendations intersect with a lot of work that is ongoing in the state, but maybe doesn't necessarily have this angle directly threaded into it as of now, but something that I think the commission can and should play a role in helping to influence going forward. So just huge appreciation to the entire team for all of the work and the opportunity to learn and dig into this with you.
Thank you, Commissioner Apter. Yeah, I've always been pretty excited about the consumption-based view of the world. It's nice to kind of come at something from a different angle and see what you can learn. So it's really great to see this. I'm looking forward to the report. Any questions for David and team relative to what we heard? I guess one simple question, are you producing both the technical document and the report to the legislature the same day? Or at the same time, I should say?
Thank you, Chair. There are 3 reports. There's a report to the legislature. There is DEQ's technical report on consumption-based emissions inventory. And then there's SEI's technical report summarizing all of their research, the marginal abatement cost curve, the forecast, the wedge analysis, the qualitative evaluation of policy options, etc. They will all be published by September 15th. It's possible the technical reports might be published a few days early, but they'll all be within the same.
Yeah, I'm being mindful of our timeline for getting recommendations done for our report, and so sooner the better, but look forward to seeing it when it's ready. If you wouldn't mind going up to the policy options relative to food, do you talk a little bit more about what an emissions intensity standard for food would look like? And how would that work?
Jenna, do you want to do this, or do you want me to?
I'll let you go ahead, David, and we might tag Elaine in at some point.
Okay. Well, let me start out with an example and see if our food specialist, Elaine Blatt, wants to add to it. This is just an example. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but public schools purchase a large amount of milk, fluid milk, and we know that fluid milk has a relatively high emissions intensity. There are different ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with fluid milk. And one way of really driving action to reduce those emissions our milk to have a carbon footprint lower than X. And here's an accounting standard you can use. And maybe here's a tool you can use to quantify the carbon footprint. And we're going to ask for disclosure. And maybe this lower carbon milk is going to be more expensive because the production practices maybe are more expensive. But there's a benefit to society in terms of reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and maybe we'll be able to offer a price premium for it. This may be cost effective. We don't know. There's actually a precedent for this. A couple of years ago, DEQ worked with the Oregon Concrete and Aggregate Producers Association and helped provide to all of their members a computer tool that allowed them to calculate the carbon footprint of hundreds of different concrete mixes, thousands actually, and to produce what are called environmental product declarations, which are third-party verified public-facing carbon footprint disclosure statements. And I'll just mention, again, this isn't specific to food, but to continue the precedent that DEQ, in partnership with the Washington Department of Commerce and the International Code Council, was just selected by the EPA to receive a $3.5 million award, a different CPRG, that will focus on developing more than 1,000 facility-specific environmental product declarations for more than 200 different concrete, asphalt, steel, wood, and other building material manufacturers. So there's a lot of activity happening in the building space, and the basic idea is take that model and bring it into high carbon food. Chair McDonald, did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. It's good to kind of think through that. There's a question in the chat about, given that high income households consume the most, should we be focused on luxury items?
Chair McDonald, our report to the legislature is recommending that the state take some policy actions, and we are not recommending what those policy actions are or how they should be structured. That's really for others to decide. But certainly our analysis would support this approach because it demonstrates that high-income households contribute the most to this problem. They have the most opportunity to reduce emissions, and they have the most, well, by opportunity, I mean they have the most emissions, so they have more opportunities to reduce them, and they also have more disposable income in order to make those sorts of changes. So I think there could be a strong equity case made for that.
Thank you.
Approach.
Are there questions? I'm assuming that the wedge analysis looked at the individual examples that you shared with us and others that you looked at in your modeling. Is that right?
Sure, McDonald, that's correct. The wedge analysis that SCI performed was structured to mirror the TIGR analysis that the commission worked on last year. It identifies, in addition to a host of existing state and federal policies, roughly 10 or so new consumption-based outcomes, such as reduced wasting of food, reduced embodied carbon in the built environment. We did not identify or evaluate, we identified policy options to achieve those outcomes, but we didn't evaluate the greenhouse gas reduction potential of specific policies.
Okay.
Because the greenhouse gas reduction potential of the policy depends on how the policy is established.
Right.
Right. So, and TIGR did exactly the same thing. TIGR focused on outcomes and identified policies to achieve them, but is sort of agnostic on which combination of policies you cobble together to achieve that outcome. And I think Martin wants to add something here.
Oh, it's just really simple. Chair McDonald, once you dig into the report, you'll see there are about a little bit more than 24 separate wedges that were created and have numbers associated with them. But it was just impossible to put them all on one chart. So for today, we combined some of them into categories.
Great. And then the MAC curves look at categories, individual policy or groups of policies.
Chair McDonald, the MAC curve focuses on the same outcomes that are in the wedge analysis.
Okay.
But because this is a relatively new and emerging field, we lacked a rich corpus of empirical evidence to generate the MAC curve estimates. And we also didn't have enough time and money to do the full meal deal. So the MAC curve in our study is sort of a preliminary demonstration that it could be done. And importantly, it demonstrates that there are some cost-effective outcomes, some outcomes that in a couple cases would actually generate more benefit than they would cost to implement. And so when we're talking about how the state should respond to the challenge of greenhouse gas emissions, the MAC curve suggests that there are some opportunities here that could deliver equally or better bang for the buck than some of the standard staple climate policies that the state already has in place.
Thank you. That's helpful. Well, maybe we could go back up to your slide that has all of the recommendations that you had. Some of them are kind of grayed out, but we can see them all. And to preview a little bit from the next agenda item, I personally feel like it would be great for us to elevate these 3 overarching recommendations in the report that we give in December to the legislature, and perhaps even thinking at that one lower layer down and to see if there are some other things that maybe would rise up to the top that could be either packaged along with these recommendations or could be ready to go or attached to other efforts that are underway in terms of legislative action. So I'm hoping and proposing that the commission follow your lead, come up with an endorsement of at least these 3 high-level recommendations. So I'd love to hear from other commissioners if that's something that sounds right to others. Commissioner Reitman.
Well, just from a political point of view, it would be good to involve, I'm just thinking of like your example of meat and dairy consumption. It would be good to involve the farm organizations when you're developing these policies, because then they can help you to implement them or to at least not oppose them possibly.
Absolutely. Great point, Commissioner Reitman. Other thoughts from commissioners about whether we should be kind of adding this to our ongoing work streams? Commissioner Ford?
Yeah, thanks, Chair McDonald. Yeah, and I would support adding this to our work stream. And I agree with Commissioner Reitman's comments as well. The folks in the ag community that are producing food substances, for example, can give us some insight about things we may not be thinking about. So I think if we involve them in the discussions, they can help us find solutions that work for everybody. So
absolutely. There is a lot of exciting activity happening around reducing emissions from agriculture that the producers are leading. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn and involve those voices and leaders in helping us think about how to do this. Especially if we were to dig down in at that next layer down and pull out individual policy ideas.
Just one other quick thought. Well, I'm unmuted for the second, which is, I think the education piece of this. I mean, I certainly was educated today through this presentation about some of this, and I certainly know a lot about life cycle assessment from a forest products perspective. But I think looking beyond forest products into these other categories is interesting and important. So, I don't see anything here specifically, unless I'm missing it, which is another leg or element here should be on educating folks, the consumers that are engaging in these various activities, right? So we're all consumers. How do we do a better job of communicating to the consumers about these issues in a way that can be influential in their decision making? So that's just a thought that I had looking at this list. And this is, these recommendations are great, but I think there's a fourth leg here, which is where's the consumer education piece?
Some of the policy ideas I think included come at the issue from that perspective. And or I think, David, as you said, help put a fine point on things if you're asking folks that are producing things we're consuming here to tell us what their footprint looks like. That's going to encourage them to reduce their footprint. So I think there's kind of two ways that things like that can help. David, you shared some thoughts around kind of education in general and kind of easy systems or systematic approaches for reducing emissions. Do you want to weigh in on this conversation?
Sure, but we'll try here.
Two things. Okay.
So the evidence that providing consumers with information will cause them to change their behaviors is rather weak and murky, particularly when those behaviors are influenced or constrained by existing infrastructure, product choices, and price signals in the market. So we have implemented some programs here at DEQ that have tried to directly change consumer behavior through information. And we think there can be a place for that. It can be useful, but it will be inadequate by itself. So Commissioner Ford appreciated your suggestion that it be a fourth leg of the stool as opposed to taking out, as opposed to a replacement leg of the stool, because we need better public information, but we also need to make low carbon choices easy, simple, even automatic. Ideally, consumers should be able to go to the store and buy whatever tickles their fancy without thinking about the carbon footprint. Because I don't know about you, but I can't think LCA every time I go to the grocery store. Certainly if I'm making a whole bunch of purchases. So ideally, all choices would be low impact choices. All choices would be low carbon choices. And consumers wouldn't have to engage so much of their frontal cortex in trying to navigate this very complicated world.
Okay, a yes and is a good approach. Great. Well, this has been really interesting work, and I want to thank the Commission's committee again those that participated in this work, and to you and your staff. I know you put a lot of time and effort into educating our commission members to participate on how they could best participate, and spend a lot of time making sure that the commission members were brought along during the process. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing the reports and to collaborating with DEQ on this important body of work going forward.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. We can now turn to our final topic, which is our biennial report. And I'll turn things over to Jeff to kick us off.
Thank you, Chair McDonald. Members of the commission, I'm going to be going over just a few slides here covering our biennial report and our process for getting this completed this year. So this slide should look familiar, but our report is due December 1st. And last year, HB 3409 actually changed the reporting time frame to December 1st of even numbered years. And so we did submit a report in March of last year. So we do have a shorter reporting window for some of those program updates for this report as compared to prior years. This report is required to cover a summary of climate change impacts in the state and the benefits of mitigation and adaptation measures. It will also look at the progress that we've made towards achieving our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, which has historically been focused on the sector-based emissions. It'll look at any emerging public policy or technological advances that are appropriate to kind of call out, and also update the policymakers on our progress in the Roadmap 2030 recommendations, as well as the Natural and Working Lands proposal. So next slide, please. So this slide provides a kind of preview of our current outline. I'm not going to walk through all of these points, but just to call out that new this year in the report, different from past reports, will be the inclusion of the consumption-based emissions inventory, results from DEQ that you just heard about. And also a big focus will be, again, on the roadmap to 2030 and kind of highlighting our key progress areas there across all the 26 recommendations, and any challenges that we've seen in places where we might need additional support. Also new to this report is going to be the focus on the directives and programs from HB 3409, such as the Natural and Working Lands work, for example. So as in past reports, we also want to report progress on new efforts around equitable climate solutions and state climate adaptation and resilience efforts. Next slide, please. So this is a report timeline really focused on the recommendations piece that we've been talking about here in this meeting. Later this month, we plan to assemble a subgroup of the commission or a committee to help develop and review recommendations to include in the report. And we'll be talking more about that on the next slide, but September 17th is our next, I'm sorry, I'm not through with the last slide there. September 17th is our next commission meeting. And so at that meeting, we are aiming to review draft recommendations and really open them up for discussion and public review and comment at that time. And that'll carry us to the October 15, which is our October meeting. And at that meeting, we really want to use that to review final draft recommendations and get those wrapped up into the final report, which is again due on December 1st. Next slide, please.
Maybe just before you go to the next slide. So I want to just put an emphasis on something that Jeff said and make sure that the rest of the commission is supportive of this. In the past, we have focused most of the commission's attention on the recommendations section rather than asking the commissioners to weigh in on every aspect of what is in the report. A lot of the elements are kind of facts that we gather and pull together and just help paint that picture for us. But just to kind of both make it easier on staff to pull all of the information together and to focus the commission's time on the kinds of things we want to share with the legislature. Our proposal is to focus in on the recommendations. And we can talk a little bit more in the next slide about the committee, but I just want to, if anybody has any big concerns about that, it has been our practice over the last probably 3 or 4 reports. But if there are folks on the commission who would really like to be more involved in some of the content that's outside of the recommendations, I think we could certainly try and accommodate that. But I think it's probably, well, we thought it might be a little more efficient to try and have the whole commission focus in on the recommendations. I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Ford. Great. Can't see everybody on the call. We did talk, like Commissioner Ross, thank you. We did talk about wanting to reach out to the agencies represented on the commission, and certainly to get input on things that the agencies think would be important for the legislature to know, so that we are able to kind of harvest some of the things that are most important across the state and across all the different sectors that we're involved in. And so I think staff will be reaching out to all the directors shortly to try and ask for even just bulleted ideas of topics that you want to make sure that we cover. So that will be coming soon. Next slide. So the idea, we haven't really had a committee take up and develop recommendations before. Generally, that was something that I worked with staff to develop. And then the commission considered and added and improved upon that starting point altogether. Given that we're talking about, and you know, one of my goals is to really get the full commission more involved, or individuals on the commission more involved in the work that we do, and certainly, for example, to take advantage of all that the committee that worked with the EQ learned in that process. You know, the idea of establishing a committee to kind of take a first cut at a review of what staff and I put together, and then frame that out and for the full commission's review. We have any meetings that we have that are not part of our overall meeting and available to everybody in the public. And we need to stay under quorum. So that means 6 or fewer members for this committee is kind of what we're looking for. In addition to developing the recommendations, we could also take a stab at any content areas that are recommended and see how they maybe fit into our overall work. We certainly would want to use the committee to help vet some of the comments that we get from the public in late September, and help us kind of sort through that and see how that might change the content and the recommendations. So my guess is, and Jeff, you and I haven't talked about this explicitly, but as I was thinking about this, it seems like we probably need 2 meetings, one in that window of time in late August, and then one at, just after the public input is heard, and then we can kind of try and take a cut at any topics that agencies are interested in seeing included in either of those meetings. So that's kind of the way that I was seeing it. Certainly love to have folks volunteer. And if I don't hear from you, I might reach out and do a little encouraging. But do let me know if you're interested in being part of that committee, and then we'll figure out if we have too many people that want to be involved. We'll come up with a different approach to having the conversations. But that's what the staff and I have been thinking about, how we might approach this. Does that generally seem like a good idea to convene a committee? I'm seeing nodding and thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, well, that was what we wanted to cover. Any other thoughts on our fall agenda and that we need to get done between now and December? In addition to this report, as we talked earlier, we have a second natural and working lands report that's due. So we will have 2 reports in progress. I did want to also mention, I meant to earlier in the agenda, we do have a call out for people who are interested in being on the Natural and Working Lands Advisory Committee that was described in House Bill 3409. So I believe the deadline for that is about the 15th. Is that right, Jeff? I think it's the 15th of August. We did a very broad distribution, but if you did not receive it and you are interested in seeing it, we can forward it along. We sent it to all the agencies that are connected to natural and working lands. We sent it to different interest groups that were involved, have been involved in the natural and working lands proposals in the past. We sent it out to all the people that had applied for the Natural and Working Lands Advisory Committee that was convened in 2022 through the work that the Institute for Natural Resources helped us with. So that's the other recruitment that's happening, and I am also hoping that we'll be able to stand up that advisory committee by the end of September. Any questions about that? Well, thanks to all of the commissioners for joining today, the directors from all the agencies. Thank you to the public for participating. At one point I looked up and we had about 76 people who have joined us today, which is great. And again, thank you to the presenters. Both sets of presentations were really helpful. And congratulations to the state of Oregon for bringing in almost $200 million. That's awesome. And with that, I will close the August 1st meeting of the Oregon Climate Action Commission. Have a great rest of your day and weekend to come.
Thank you, Kathy.
You bet.
Thank you.
Good meeting, Kathy. Well done.
Thank you.